Chapter 596. Soren had a headache now. Arendelle's Princess Anna was a little better. Now his biggest headache was how to deal with Vivian. The little girl insisted on standing up to face the Fear Lord. On the one hand, Soren wanted to train her, but on the other hand he was worried about danger. It was like children who grew up and were not necessarily arranged by their parents. Although Vivian was sometimes very obedient, if she decided on something, her temper would be as stubborn as Soren. She couldn't always hide under his umbrella. There would always be a day when the eagle would spread its wings and fly high. Soren could bring her back by force. With Vivian's obedience, even if she was unwilling, she would follow him back to Mordor City. But this was not a long-term solution. Besides, Soren thought that Vivian's decision was actually right. She really needed to train. So what he could do now was to ensure Vivian's safety as much as possible and secretly allocate enough manpower to help her deal with the Fear Church. One thing that was gratifying was, the little girl also learned a lot from him. She didn't recklessly go up to trouble the Fear Church. Instead, she knew how to subdue some Nagas as fighters first. Since he planned to train Vivian, Soren naturally needed to make detailed arrangements. Guards! Soren shouted outside and soon a guard came in. He ordered in a deep voice, immediately send people to collect any information about the Fear Church. Spread out all the spies of Mordor City in Shipwreck Bay, Port Tylon, and the City of Wealth. Send people to contact the Thieves' Union and the Shadow Thieves' Union. Also contact the Adventurers' Union. Don't be afraid to spend money. I will transfer 300,000 Kindler as funds. Even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground, you must find them all. Money opened the way. 300,000 Kindler coins was equivalent to the annual income of a small duchy. Now, only Mordor City could easily take out so much money. If it was other forces, they would have to spend a lot of money. The Treasure Island was already on the right track, and there was a steady flow of funds in Mordor City. There were more than 500,000 Kindler on the books, and there was a large amount of gold and jewelry in the warehouse. With Mordor City as the center, Soren's forces were now like a sea kingdom. With so much gold spilled out, all the intelligence organizations near the south coast went crazy. Regardless of whether it was useful or not, any information related to the terror sect was sent over to be collected and sorted out. Soon their movements were sent to Soren. For the Thieves' Union, this was a big order that they hadn't received for many years. It hadn't even been 3 days. A detailed and accurate information was sent over. The Fear cult was indeed active in the southern region. After the death of the demigod vampire, they seemed to have been reconvened by someone. The locations of the Fear cult's activities were marked. It was worth mentioning. This time there were demons in the Fear cult, and the Thieves' Union lost 3 veterans in order to spy on them. Soren naturally had to do something. For the sake of Vivian, he never felt any heartache when spending money. After all, money was meant to be spent. He directly sent a chest of gold to the Thieves' Union. Immediately, the other party seemed to have been injected with chicken blood and was prepared to dig 3 feet into the ground to pry out all the information. Fear cult. If it was another god's church, they would still need to think about it, but for a god's church that was gradually weakening, the Thieves' Union still dared to test it. The movements of Mordor City could naturally attract the attention of many people. However, many forces were happy to see Mordor City suddenly fighting with the Fear cult. Anyway, as long as Mordor City fought with others, they would like it. Of course, all of this still required a proper name on the table. That was, Mordor City was attacked by the Fear cult some time ago. The Fear cult summoned demons and caused great destruction in Mordor City, even causing the death of many civilians. Sir Soren was very angry about this and decided to mobilize forces to eliminate the Fear cult and let anyone who offended Mordor City pay a painful price. This was the reason why it was on the table. Anyway, as long as any force spied, they would know that Mordor City had been attacked by the Fear cult, and there were many demons. The entire Mordor City was running like a war machine. With this matter as a reason, Soren simply took the opportunity to launch an attack. He blatantly mobilized the fleet near Shipwreck Bay, and at the same time, hoarded a large number of troops to guard Port Tylon. The external explanation was naturally to deal with the revenge of the Fear cult at any time. But when the leaders of other forces heard this, they almost vomited blood. Was it necessary to mobilize so many warships to attack the Fear cult? Could it be that he wanted to use warships to deal with the Fear cult? At first, the leaders of the forces who thought that this could consume the power of Mordor City suddenly became a little uneasy because they thought of a very bad thing. That was, what if Soren suddenly said that someone was colluding with the Fear cult, and Mordor City was ready to retaliate? When they thought of this, they even wanted to kill themselves. The more they thought about it, the more they felt that it was possible. Mordor City now had the biggest fist in the entire south. Whatever Soren said, even if you didn't collude with the fear cult, as long as Mordor City said that you colluded with the fear cult, then they could take the opportunity to attack at any time. At that time, a large number of warships would surround them, and Mordor City would mobilize a large number of troops to attack the ground. At that time, no one would be able to sit still. In fact, Soren also thought of this secretly. The fear cult did cause great damage in Mordor City and killed many civilians. It was reasonable for Soren to retaliate against them. So while attacking the fear cult, he could also attack some other targets. But what surprised him was that maybe other forces were really afraid of being implicated. One by one, they stood up and said that they had nothing to do with the fear cult. For this evil organization that violated the rules and caused terrible damage and killed civilians, they all expressed their willingness to help Mordor City fight against the fear cult. As for whether to deal with the fear cult or not, it didn't matter. But things had developed to this point. No matter how they expressed, Soren still mobilized a large number of warships. At the same time, he secretly cooperated with Vivian to deal with the fear cult, and he also realized that the time was almost ripe. It was time to take down a piece of land in the southern continent. Wind Spear Hills. This was a rather fertile land. More importantly, there was no force that could compete with him here, and it was very close to Shipwreck Bay. Soren could use it to strengthen his connection with the inland at any time. This secret line had been buried for a long time. Soren took this opportunity to turn it into the fruit of his harvest. Chapter 597. In a blink of an eye, it was almost August. The second phase of terraced fields in Mordor City was about to be reclaimed. After mixing a batch of materials, the golem factory produced 5 clay golems and 1 golem. These golems were put into the construction as labor. They could easily carry heavy materials, which was more than several times more efficient than human labor. Fallen Witch and Gloria were recently engaged in intense research work. Soren left a space beacon on the 3rd floor of the Abyss. They were going to work together to build a portal to the Abyss during this time. The orders from the Northland Council increased again. No one knew what Mordor City was going to do. So far, they had ordered 3 batches of heavy two-handed weapons. On this day, with the arrival of autumn and summer, heavy rain fell everywhere. There seemed to be a flood in the central part of the continent. The lizard men expanded their territory again with the flood. Many flooded areas were occupied by them. However, the south was relatively calm. Except for the occasional traces of the fallen, some people saw the legendary Lich some time ago. The Lich rarely walked in the world. As the top undead life, they had endless years to squander. The Lich's favorite thing was to stay in their tombs for research. But recently, there seemed to be a Lich in the south, which attracted the attention of the paladins. South of the Wind Spear Hills, there was a dense forest. This was the territory of the Isabella family. It was a place where the noble children hunted when they were bored. The heavy rain had just stopped. There was a group of people moving along the road. They were well equipped and had fierce faces. Some of them were even equipped with military crossbows and other weapons. At first glance, one could tell that they were the private soldiers of the nobles. Baron. A middle-aged man dressed as a knight rode to the center of the team and said in a deep voice, "After the mountain in front of us, we will reach our territory. Recently, a group of snake bandits have appeared in the Wind Spear Hills. Let's not rest here." Soon there was a reply from the team. A young noble with a little tiredness said, "Sir Slake, do as you see fit." The middle-aged knight bowed slightly and nodded, but there was a hint of disdain in his expression. It had only been 2 days, but he was already so tired. Compared to the old baron who had killed the ogres with his bare hands, the new lord was too weak. His fancy swordsmanship was only meant to attract those noble ladies. As a knight, he had never seen the baron do the most basic exercise. The group continued forward. These guards were veterans who had been on the battlefield. Even if they encountered adventurers one-on-one, they would not be at a disadvantage. Sir Slake was not very worried that bandits would dare to attack them, but out of his habit of being cautious, he still sent out his trusted aide to investigate the situation ahead. However, more than 10 minutes had passed, but there was still no sign of anyone returning. Sir Slake had a bad feeling in his heart. He could not help but quietly press his hand on the hilt of his sword, and then urged his horse to rush to the front of the group. The surroundings seemed to be very quiet. Suddenly, a cold light shot out from the side of the forest. Then a scream was heard. A guard clutched his throat and fell down. "Be careful. There are archers ambushing here." A burst of exclamations sounded, and then people fell to the ground one after another. From the dense forest, shadows rushed out. They were holding all kinds of weapons, but the most eye-catching thing was their skin. These people had silver scales on their skin, and they were wearing all kinds of armor. They surrounded the group from both sides. Snake people. Damn it! It's the snake people bandits. The group was a little flustered, but they quickly gathered under the command of Sir Slake and formed a defensive formation in the middle of the group. Recently there were many traces of snake people in the south. This was especially true in the Windspear Hills. Many merchant caravans had been attacked by the Nagas. Many nobles knew that there was a group of Naga bandits roaming around. Even Baraneros had died at the hands of the Nagas. It was because of this that they brought so many guards with them. But when he saw the number of enemies, Sir Slake still took a breath of cold air, and his heart could not help but be covered with a shadow. The number of snake people bandits had increased again. In addition to the snake people, there were also many other human bandits attacking them. The number of bandits was at least twice their number. It's poisonous. A guard's face was black and he seemed to be on the verge of collapse. He said with a trembling voice, "The enemy's weapon is poisonous. Be careful." A round of shooting came. Sir Slake turned over and dismounted his horse. He picked up a shield and blocked in front of him. The guards around him also raised their shields, and some of them were shooting back at the enemy with crossbows. There were people falling to the ground constantly. The bandits in front of them rushed over like a swarm of bees, and the losses on both sides were not small. Sir Slake carefully looked at the snake people in front of him. Most of the human bandits were very weak. The real danger was these snake people. If he could kill the enemy's leader, perhaps this group of bandits would collapse. Found it? Sir Slake quickly found the snake people leader who was commanding the battle. He roared, suddenly raised his shield in front of his chest, and directly knocked away the crowd in front of him. Then he launched a charge and swung his sword at the snake people leader. As a high-grade knight, he had the courage and strength to directly kill the enemy's leader in a chaotic battle. A dark light flashed across. Sir Slake's figure suddenly stiffened on the spot. Two figures suddenly appeared in his line of sight, followed by a dagger piercing his throat. Rogues. Two high-grade rogues. Outside this group of bandits, there were more dangerous enemies hidden. Darkness fell. Sir Slake's figure slowly fell to the ground. Before he died, he seemed to hear the Baron begging for mercy. The voice sounded like a woman's. The snake people bandits appeared again. The news seemed to have wings and quickly spread to nearby places. But this time it was not the merchants who were attacked, but the nobles of the Isabella family, the rulers of the Windspear territory. The cause of the incident seemed to be that the lord of this place had once encircled and annihilated a group of Naga bandits. He had even nailed one of their leaders to death on a cross in an attempt to intimidate the lawless bandit group. But he never expected that the snake people bandits would take revenge on the ruler of the Windspear Hills and directly kill several nobles. A conspiracy net had begun to close. After the first step of the plan was completed, the next step was Adele Isabella's stage. Soren's shadow shrouded this land. No one knew whether it would bring a terrible disaster to the people or the prosperity and hope of the second Mordor city. But there was no doubt about one thing. Any beautiful beginning was full of blood and slaughter. It was as if only by embracing war could one usher in peace. Chapter 598. The warm autumn wind blew through the Ulriais Mountains, along the Zenlaga Swamp, and across Solitude City. This was a city with a sad history. The name Solitude City seemed to tell people everything it had experienced. This was an ancient city that had existed for hundreds of years. It was not as prosperous as Whiterun, but it had never been broken down. This was the missionary area of the God of Knowledge. Their doctrine believed that scholars should be used to enduring loneliness. Bearing this loneliness was to pass on knowledge, to pass on all the valuable books and knowledge of any race or civilization in the long river of time. This city was far away from the flames of war. It was not just the reverence for knowledge, but also because there were many powerful scholars of the neutral camp here. Knowledge was power. Countless books were kept in the Tower of Solitude City. In addition to poetry, literature, history, and legends, there were also many knowledge of magic, alchemy, arcana, and so on. As long as these scholars could collect and preserve it, they would copy, repair, and complete it as much as possible. Finally, one book after another was stored in the Tower of Solitude City. No one knew how many books and literature were kept in the tower. They only knew that this job had existed for hundreds of years. These scholars could even be rewarded by the God of Knowledge after submitting new books. This used to be the favorite place of adventurers. Because although the god of knowledge was not powerful, he was a generous god. It seemed that for this god he did not care about anything other than knowledge. Ancient documents from underground ruins could be sold here for a high price. Even broken and simple inscriptions could be exchanged for a good profit. This was the city with the highest literacy rate in the material plane. Once, the god of knowledge wanted to promote enlightenment books, but because of the productivity of the entire plane, all of his plans failed in the end. Solitude City was like a scholar living in seclusion. There was no bustling trade here, nor convenient transportation. People had been living a peaceful life, like a group of hermits busy with their mission. However, recently some things had disrupted the peace of Solitude City. With the flood in the southern area, the lizard men expanded their territory along the river. It was said that the god they served had made a move, and during this time many lizard men tribes had united. Solitude City was also a little affected. The overflowing river submerged the farmlands, and displaced civilians gathered outside the city. The appearance of the refugees provided an opportunity for some evil people. In addition to the shadow of the cult of fear, there were faint traces of devil activity here. The boundaries of the plane were getting weaker and weaker. It seemed that the devils could always find a way to appear in the material plane. The believers of the god of light were now somewhat exhausted from running around. Is this the parish of the god of knowledge? A young magus came to the front of the city gate. He looked at everything in front of him and seemed a little disappointed. He murmured, "I thought this would be another magus city, but I didn't expect it to be so ordinary." He was used to the prosperity of the south coast and felt a little disappointed in this city. The secret of knowledge is not preservation but creation and discovery. The middle-aged nun standing next to him smiled. She had an arcane aura around her. She was a wizard and a priest. She shook her head slightly and said, "This place still lacks a little vitality." "Angelina, what are you looking at? Come here quickly." A group of carriages passed by them, and the coachman carefully glanced at the insignia on the other party's chest. He bent down slightly and cautiously passed by them to avoid bumping into these people of extraordinary status. Some of them were wearing the emblem of the Silver Moon Church, and some of them were priests who served the Silver Moon Lady. A clear and melodious voice of a young girl was heard. Then a delicate and pretty young girl walked over, somewhat at a loss as to what to do. She muttered, "It's nothing. Nothing. I just felt a little absent-minded just now." The middle-aged nun smiled and stroked her long hair. She said softly, "Silly child. Everything has passed. You are the one favored by the Silver Moon Lady. The Silver Moon Lady has been watching over you silently. No one can hurt you." The girl seemed a little shy. She nodded slightly and did not speak. She just looked at the alley before leaving, vaguely feeling something. In the alley, a man with a gloomy face was looking over here. He frowned and murmured, "The son of fear has been found. But the target is actually a believer of the Silver Moon Lady. No. This matter must be reported to the priest first." On the other side, a team was also moving towards Lonely City. The leader was a middle-aged man with a cold face and murderous aura. He looked like an executioner. He frowned and looked at the river not far away. He whispered, "Mississippi, there is a lizard man scout behind us that has been following us for a long time. Do you want to send someone to kill it?" After a while, a clear child's voice came from the carriage in the middle of the team. It said calmly, "Don't worry about it. These lizard men are not worth our time." The middle-aged man responded, "Yes." The team continued to move forward quickly. It could be seen that this team was well equipped. The guards on the left and right were all good fighters. There was even no shortage of high-grade professions with rich combat experience. Lonely City had appeared in front of them. All of a sudden, there was a strange energy fluctuation in the carriage, followed by a clear child's voice, "Stop. We are not going to enter the city today. Order everyone to camp outside the city and be on guard." The team quickly moved. It could be seen that they cooperated well and carried out orders very efficiently. The rogues sent out soon found a suitable place to camp and not easy to be attacked. The hidden sentries also began to set up alert traps around. There is a son of fear here. In the carriage, Vivian, who was wearing a delicate black princess dress, showed an excited smile at the corner of her mouth. She seemed to be talking to herself. "Vivian, let's go and kill him." There was a short silence. The little girl then said to herself, "Lillian, the battle between the sons of fear is over. I can feel that the other party is not hostile. As if feeling unhappy, the little girl pouted and said with some interest, "There are only enemies between the sons of fear and no friends. If we don't kill him, maybe he will want to kill us? Forget it. Let's finish the business first. This son of fear is very weak. It should not be a threat to us." Chapter 599. Enlina. Enlina? What's wrong with you today? The middle-aged nun found something strange. She turned around and looked at the girl who was stiff in place. She wondered, "Why do you feel weird today? Are you not feeling well?" The girl named Enlina raised her head. Her smile was a little stiff and her face was slightly pale. She quickly followed up and said with a forced smile, No. Maybe I'm really not feeling well today." Just now, she felt a strong spiritual power. The sons of fear could sense each other. The closer the distance, the stronger the perception between the two sides. This bloodline ability made it convenient for the sons of fear to kill each other. The girl felt a powerful force, more powerful than any son of fear. Just at the moment of contact, she felt cold all over, as if she was being stared at by a ferocious monster. Deep in her heart, she wanted to escape because of fear. But she didn't want to run away or fight, so she concentrated on passing on her goodwill as much as possible. She didn't know if the other party felt it. Enlina was still a little uneasy because she knew that it was difficult for her to get along with these brothers and sisters as a son of fear. There weren't many sons of fear left in the material plane. Most of the powerful sons of fear had died in the hands of the vampiric son of fear, and the rest were sons of fear like her. Because she hadn't killed other brothers and sisters, and her own strength wasn't strong enough, she was easily ignored by people. For a long time in the past, she lived in seclusion in a monastery in the mountains, and the Church of the Silver Moon Lady protected her. She was a kind-hearted girl. She didn't want to kill or see death. During the time when she was shrouded in the power of fear, the most common thing she did was to pray to the Silver Moon Lady. Maybe it was fate. Among countless believers, the Silver Moon Lady finally heard her prayer. Feeling the purity of her heart and the piety of her faith, the Silver Moon Lady turned her into her own patron. She had the blessing of the Silver Moon Lady. This was the first time she had traveled so far, but she didn't expect to meet other sons of fear in the end. The group arrived in front of a big house. The middle-aged nun came to Lonely City this time to ask for help. They needed to borrow some books and documents from the scholars of Lonely City to find out a very important thing. The solitary city rarely lent out books, but the scholars did not object to others coming over to read them. With the power of the Church of the Silver Moon, it was easy for them to obtain the right to read it. At the same time, they received the proper arrangements from the scholars. This time, the middle-aged nun only brought her out to see the outside world. After a large number of books and documents were sent over, the group of them began to quickly flip through them. They needed to find out the ins and outs of an item, and because it was too old, it might take a lot of time. The delicate and pretty girl was somewhat uneasy. After dinner, she returned to her room while the others continued to flip through the information in the hall. In the blink of an eye, night had fallen. She didn't know why, but Enlina just couldn't fall asleep no matter how hard she tossed and turned. Just like that, she dragged on until dawn. Suddenly, a muffled explosion came from outside. Immediately after, there was a flash of fire. Angelina got up alertly and went to the window to look outside. The guards of Solitude City were hurrying over, and the priests and spellcasters of the Church of Lore were approaching at high speed. The size of the explosion was very small. It seemed to be controlled by someone as it didn't affect other streets. However, as the core area of the explosion, a house was almost razed to the ground. Enlina's heart skipped a beat because she suddenly realized that the location of the explosion was the place where she felt something was wrong for the first time today. She could faintly hear the sounds of the solitary city guards evacuating the crowd, and the panicked shouts of some civilians. Devil! Devil! Prepare for battle! Clang! The door of the room was suddenly knocked open. The middle-aged nun rushed in and glanced at her. She couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Enlina? Are you okay? What's wrong? Why didn't you respond when I called you several times? The girl was distracted. At this time she was a little at a loss. I didn't hear it just now. The middle-aged nun couldn't help but sigh. She quickly handed a badge made by a priest to Enlina, and then seriously instructed, "Don't go out. There are fear cultists outside causing trouble. There are also traces of devils. Stay here. I'll take some people out to see the situation." Lady Silvermoon was the backbone of the good faction. Her priest naturally couldn't sit back and watch the devils destroy. These abyss devils acted without scruples, and they might hurt many innocent civilians. The middle-aged nun left with a few people, while Enlina stood by the window in a daze. Her intuition told her that what happened tonight was related to what she felt during the day. A faint breeze brushed past. All of a sudden, Enlina noticed that a figure had appeared outside her window. Under the bright moonlight, a girl wearing a pure white princess dress appeared in front of Enlina. Her skin was as fair as milk, and she looked like a fallen angel. The other party looked at Enlina with a smile that was not a smile. Enlina was shrouded in an indescribable fear, making it difficult for Enlina to breathe. Enlina was very sure of one thing. If the other party wanted to kill her, it would only take a blink of an eye. Tiske tiske. Accompanied by a faint magic aura, the little angel-like girl appeared in Enlina's room. The other party might only be in her teens. She was looking at Enlina with an unfriendly gaze, muttering to herself, "She's really weak. Such a person shouldn't be a threat to us, right? Should we kill her?" For a moment Enlina felt cold all over. She wanted to shout but couldn't speak. She could only look at her with a frightened and pleading gaze. A moment ago she was like a little angel, but at this moment she felt like the other party was a little devil. The cute little girl suddenly laughed like flowers blooming in spring. Then she muttered to herself, "Lillian, you're being naughty again. Don't scare her." "Hello. My name is Vivian. I'm a son of fear like you. Maybe we should be considered sisters." A fair and tender little hand stretched out in front of Enlina. She shook it a little, but her body was still trembling slightly. She whispered, "My name is Enlina." The little girl in front of her chuckled and said slowly, "Don't worry. We won't kill you. Today we're just here to see if you're a threat to us." Enlina quickly shook her head and said with a trembling voice, "No. I don't want to get involved in those conflicts. I don't want to get involved in those disputes. I just want to be a good nun and live a quiet life. I know them. But I'll never be like them." The little girl in front of her seemed to be deep in thought. Then she let out a crisp laugh, waved her hand and disappeared, leaving only a clear childish voice, "I understand. Nice to meet you, Sister Enlina. Stay away from all this. I hope you can find the peaceful life you want." To a certain extent, all the sons of fear were directly related by blood. It was just that cruel fate made them kill each other. According to the previous trajectory of fate, the little girl named Enlina should have died in the hands of the Witch of Fear, Lillian. But everything had been changed by Soren. Because of Vivian and Soren, the Witch of Fear, Lillian didn't completely fall into chaos and evil. When they met such a girl today, they chose to let her go. If the Witch of Fear, Lillian, wasn't strong enough when they met her, she would have been regarded as a possible threat. If Vivian didn't obstruct or even interfere with her decision when they met her. If Soren was already dead when they met her. The will of the Dread Lord had already affected her thoughts. Then there was no doubt about it. The little girl named Enlina would die in Lillian's hands because the power of the Sons of Fear came from killing each other. And this matter would also thoroughly enrage a powerful deity. But now everything had changed. The trajectory of fate was really wrong. Chapter 600. The trajectory of history would not change much because of individuals. Because even the gods could not stop the arrival of the Avatar crisis. Before the storm that was about to affect the whole multiverse, Soren's intelligence organization suddenly sent him a very important piece of information. This even made Soren directly give up the idea of further developing the war chess plane. He also temporarily slowed down the expansion of his demon avatar in the abyss and put a lot of energy into the material plane. The reason for all of this was simple. This information was about the god of the hunt, Mailer. As the Avatar crisis was getting closer and closer, this lesser divine power god was also directly swept out of his divine kingdom by the terrible energy storm. In a quiet and dim room, Soren sat alone in a chair and pondered. His index finger gently tapped on the table as if he was making a major decision. The god of the hunt, Mailer. In the multiverse, the only god who had a clergy related to slaughter and was only a lesser divine power. Soren was the son of slaughter. It could be said that from any point of view, the clergy and power of the god of the hunt were of great help to Soren. And more importantly, this god was someone he could defeat. Because the gap between a lesser divine power and a lesser divine power was not so big, unlike other gods who were impossible to defeat. But the most important point was that the god of the hunt, Mailer, was an old god. As a god of the chaotic evil camp, he had many enemies. The only close ally was the Maiden of Pain, the one who attacked the Princess Royal in the Frost Kingdom. Even under such circumstances, the god of the hunt could still live well, which showed that his own strength was still very strong. The god of the hunt was not the demigod vampire. He was already very familiar with the power of the gods and had a mature divine church. If Sauron wanted to deal with him, he would definitely be courting death if he went straight to his door. So, to deal with such a god, one must plan well. It would be best to weave a conspiracy and use the many enemies of the god of the hunt to weaken his power, and finally give Sauron an opportunity to kill him. It was quite risky to decide to deal with the god of the hunt. But it was also something with unimaginable benefits because the god of the hunt, Malor, in addition to the clergy of the god of the hunt, had other powers that were very important to Sauron. Relying on his strong memory, Sauron wrote down the basic information about the god of the hunt on a piece of white paper. It recorded the most basic things about the god of the hunt. God name, god of the hunt, Malor. Title, King of Beasts, Black-Blooded Beast. Divine System, Storm Divine System, acting alone. Ally, Maiden of Pain. Level, Lesser Divine Power Holy Emblem, Bloodstained Beast Claw Residential Area, Heart of Fury. Alignment, Chaotic Evil Clergy, Hunting Domain, Chaos Evil Moon Power Bloodlust Believers, Hunters Evil War Creatures Ferocious Beasts and Monsters etc. Priest Alignment, Chaotic Neutral Evil Chaotic Evil. Favorite Weapon, Beast Claw Gauntlet, +3 Divine Equipment. The god of the hunt, Malor, once served the Lord of Storms with other evil gods, but because the Lord of Storms stole the power of the Winter Maiden, these gods who served him became disloyal. In the end, the alliance between the divine systems became quite unstable. It was also because of this that the Lord of Storms began to cultivate the power of his own divine system. For Sauron, the god of hunting had two very important priesthoods. One was the hunting priesthood, which was an extension of the killing priesthood, which could be used to stabilize the priesthood of a great divine power. The second was the tracking priesthood, which had too many functions, especially in the coming period of the Avatar crisis. Mastering the tracking priesthood could help Sauron seek the greatest benefits. It would be difficult for Sauron's enemies to escape his sight. There were too many things he could do with the tracking clergy. The more important reason why he targeted the god of the hunt, Malor, was that he did not have enough allies. For example, the Shadow Lord, Sauron's potential enemy, was an ally of the powerful Lady of the Night and maintained a close relationship with other gods. But the god of the hunt, Malor, was different. As a god of the chaotic evil alignment, it was difficult for him to maintain a friendly relationship with other gods. On the contrary, the god of the hunt had many enemies, and it was difficult to find a better target than him. North of Whiterun. This was where the information came from. There was accurate news that a large number of believers who served the god of the hunt, Malor, and a large number of beastmen and various evil monsters gathered here. This was the domain of the god of the hunt. As a chaotic evil god, Malor was worshipped by many evil creatures. It was not easy to plan against a god. Sauron needed more information and a plan to weaken the enemy's power. Only when the right opportunity came, he could personally appear and give the enemy a fatal blow. It could be said that Sauron was determined to get the priesthood of hunting. For Sauron, the hunting clergy was even more important than the shadow clergy. It was far from easy to deal with a god. He had to start planning before the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. Just like Lolth, the queen of spiders who ruled the Underdark, she had already begun to weave her own conspiracy, waiting for the right time to drag the prey into the net. The city of Mordor seemed to be quiet. The tense situation on the south coast seemed to gradually stabilize. Sauron did not use force against many forces on the south coast. He just kept attacking the Fear Church and pulled out their strongholds one by one. Something happened in the Wind Spear Hills, but the southern nobles did not pay too much attention to it. They were more worried about the Wandering Lich. They did not know what the Lich was going to do. Now many people had found traces of undead activities. Under the calm, Mordor secretly sent scouts to the direction of Whiterun. Sauron was not eager for quick success, but carefully collected all useful information. Dealing with a real god required enough patience because it was quite dangerous. The god of the hunt, Malor. Sauron looked at the god with the king of beasts, and the black-blooded beast. He needed to weave a conspiracy and provoke a conflict between the god of the hunt and other gods. Chapter 601. The God of the Hunt, Malor. This god was known as the King of Beasts, the Beast of Black Blood. The most powerful proof of his arrival in the mortal world was that the followers of the hunters began to move on a large scale and attacked some creatures in the elven forest. They even angered an adult dragon. The god of the hunt had a special power. He could also use slaughter to increase his power, but unlike Soren, he relied on hunting rituals to strengthen his divine power. A real god had a divinity that could store divine power. But in fact, most gods did not have full divine power because it was difficult for any god to reach this limit. Even for gods with great divine power, the limit of divine power they could hold was far higher than the divine power they had. For example, Soren now had 15 divinity points and could store up to 300 divine power points. The ratio was about 120, but in fact, Soren rarely had more than 100 divine power points. The other gods were similar. The only way to easily replenish divine power was to use the power of the divine kingdom to convert it, but this way the power of the divine kingdom would be consumed by the gods. There was a saying that went like this: the gods have almost endless power in their own kingdom. In the gods' kingdom, the gods could draw divine power to replenish themselves. As long as the gods' kingdom was not destroyed, the power would be endless. That was why there were so many minor divine power and low divine power gods who survived in the cruel history. Because even the great divine power gods did not dare to rashly attack the kingdoms of other gods. Once they entered the enemy's home space, their own power would be constantly consumed, while the enemy's power could be continuously restored by the god's kingdom. It was even possible for a weak god to exhaust a powerful god to death in a god's kingdom. Therefore, the struggle between gods would persist in attacking the other side's church and believers in the material plane because this could fundamentally disintegrate and reduce the power of the divine kingdom of the enemy gods. When the divine kingdom of the enemy gods weakened to a certain extent, it was possible for one of the gods to launch an all-out attack. At that time, it was possible to kill the enemy gods. Although Soren had become a god, he had never enjoyed the treatment of a real god. That kind of almost endless power, with the god kingdom constantly replenishing his divine power, was an experience that he could not be satisfied with at the moment. The Avatar crisis was coming soon. The gods in the sky were falling down one after another. If Soren wanted to enter the gods' kingdom, he would be knocked down as soon as he entered. At that time, even if he didn't die, he would be severely injured. The Avatar crisis was coming. Basically, all the gods who were knocked down from the sky by the energy storm did not have a single divine power value on them. In other words, they were completely knocked down to the mortal world in the form of a naked saint. Therefore, the gods were at their weakest when they had just been knocked down. This was why the god of rogues and half-elves had to run away desperately. In that case, he had little divine power. He only had the blessing of the saint form, and his other powers were almost the same as other high-grade legendary professions. His divine power value was reset to 0. This situation was a disaster for any god. They, who were used to having great divine power, naturally had to try their best to restore their power when they were very weak. Divine power value could also be restored, because the divinity of the gods themselves was a container to store divine power. Just like Soren's church organized believers to pray, the power of faith was constantly converted into divine power value and then stored in his body. This was a channel to restore divine power. However, the Avatar crisis was tantamount to beating all the gods back to their original form. Whether you were a new god who had just become a god or a god who had existed for a long time and developed the church for thousands of years, now when you were knocked down by the energy storm, all your divine power was reset to 0. Even if your god's kingdom had stored thousands of divine power in its long history, now there was no way to mobilize even a little bit of divine power. If you wanted to restore your own divine power value, you could only rely on the church and believers in the mortal world to start from scratch. From now on, you could accumulate divine power little by little. The Avatar crisis was at its worst. The power of the divinity owned by the gods would be suppressed, but now it had not fully erupted. The gods who were knocked down basically had their divine power emptied. His powerful divine power had been emptied. Now what? The first thing all the gods who were knocked down to the mortal world did was to familiarize themselves with the body of the saint, and then began to accumulate divine power with themselves as the core. Although this process was very slow, it could still leave some power. However, this was a slow and stupid way. In fact, there were other channels to increase one's divine power value. That was to carry out prayer ceremonies and sacrificial ceremonies. For example, Soren now, ordinary prayers were estimated to be less than 1 divine power value a day, but if he held a large worship prayer on the rest day, then he could increase his divine power value by 2 to 3 points that day. Back to the topic. This was the case for the god of the hunt, Malor. Soren came to a conclusion after analyzing a lot of information, that was, the god of the hunt was restoring his divine power through a bloody sacrificial ceremony. He was called the Beast of Black Blood. If Soren's divinity of half-elf and rogue were passive divinities, then the divinity of hunting of the god of the hunt, Malor, was an active divinity. The active divinity had a special effect. In the process of the believer's hunting, Malor, the god of the hunt, could slowly restore his divine power, and at the same time expand his influence on the material plane. For any evil god, others praying to him because of fear, awe, and other emotions, or even mentioning his divine name, could also bring a little bit of power. This was also the reason why the number of followers of the goddess of ocean was not large, but they had great divine power. The prosperity of the sea trade led to human beings being forced to sacrifice to her and pray for smooth sailing. This process was to improve her power, but if the sea trade declined in the future, her own influence would be greatly reduced. In history, there were many similar gods who rose to prosperity in a short period of time, but after a period of time, these gods were often beaten back to their original state. The most representative god was the god of war. The god of the hunt had a special hobby called bloody lust. He might be the god in the multiverse who liked legendary blood the most. The so-called legendary blood referred to the blood of any legendary creature, whether it was human, beast, monster, or other creatures. As long as they reached the legendary level, their blood had some kind of power that even the gods could not ignore. As long as anyone offered legendary blood sacrifices to the god of the hunt, he could respond and be rewarded, and even satisfy some of the sacrifice's wishes. Even if the person was not his believer, as long as the god of the hunt felt the power of legendary blood, he would respond to the prayers of the other party, regardless of whether the person was in the good or evil camp. For a god of the chaotic evil camp like the god of the hunt, Malor, he did not have so many concerns. He only cared about his own power. The movement near the elf forest was for the bloody sacrifice ceremony. The god of the hunt, Malor, did not have enough believers like other gods, and the number and power of his church were not as large as the other gods. Perhaps the number of believers was even less than the current Soren. After all, Soren's church had a large number of half-elf civilians, while the god of the hunt, Malor himself, had the most believers of monsters, beasts, and evil hunters. There was no way to restore much divine power by relying on the prayers of believers, but he also had his own way, which was to use the initiative of the hunt clergy to restore his power. And this point, it happened to be what Soren could use now. Chapter 602. Mordor City War Chess Plane. Now on the first floor of this plane, there was an additional laboratory with a large area. Next to it was the original golem factory, but because of the lack of raw materials, this work has been temporarily closed. The most troublesome thing to make a golem was not the basic materials, but the soul crystal as the core of the operation. This thing was very difficult to find in the material plane. The drop rate of monsters was shockingly low. Only spiritual monsters that wandered the material plane had a chance of dropping natural soul crystals. Just like the ghosts that Soren killed in Amber City, they dropped a gray soul crystal. Under normal circumstances, obtaining soul crystals required very profound spells, or they could be purchased from other planes. Things on the soul level were the most complicated. Although Soul Drain was only a spell above level 8, there were very few wizards who could master it, and even fewer who could successfully cast it. Otherwise the Grim Reaper would have been furious. As long as the spellcasters mastered the spell to imprison souls, they could easily plunder a large number of souls from their hands. Mordor City now did not lack stones, gems, or activation spells to make golems. What they lacked was soul crystals of various levels. In the laboratory, with a strange light appearing on the crystal energy transmission pipe, suddenly a strong magic wave was transmitted from the laboratory, followed by the excited voice of Fallen which, "Success! Daughter. I did it." A teleportation spell was directly connected to the interior of the laboratory, and then Gloria walked out from the teleportation circle on the left side of the laboratory. "Mother? Did you finally succeed?" Gloria's expression was also a little excited. She walked quickly to the experiment table and saw a fist-sized diamond lying quietly on it. Diamond. It was also commonly known as diamond, and it was not very common in any plane. This material was very expensive and rare. Even if you spend a high price, you might not be able to buy much of it. Wizards, who were born rich, were also quite cautious about using diamonds for experiments. However, a mage was still a mage after all. During the Arcane Kingdom, a large number of experiments and research had been conducted in order to use alchemy to produce diamond seam in batches. It was not only for money and research but more importantly for a legendary level alchemy puppet. Diamond Golem. This was the most powerful type of regular golem and the most difficult to deal with. The reason why Soren felt helpless about the Shadow Plains Wizard Tower was not only because of the Mana Pulse Crystal Cannon above, but also because of the Diamond Golem that was responsible for guarding the Wizard Tower. Diamond Golem was a legendary level puppet. They were the top war machines. Even without any modifications, the challenge level of an ordinary Diamond Golem could reach above level 16. To put it simply, the Diamond Golem could take a 6-armed Naga down with it. Let's see. Gloria picked up the heavy diamond, stroked it a little and said in a serious voice, "Mother, since this research is successful, what are you going to do next?" The Fallen Witch looked at her with joy and slowly said, "Continue to increase the amount of alchemy conversion. We need Diamond Golem. If we can create a few Diamond Golems, I'm afraid we'll have the ability to open the door of the Adept Tower from the front." The Fallen Witch was naturally talking about the Shadow Plains Wizard Tower. Gloria heard this and fell into deep thought. Then she frowned and said, "Even if there are enough Diamond Golems and other materials, what about the soul shard that is close to the legendary level? We don't know any spells to imprison souls, and it's difficult to buy this kind of high-level soul shard in the material plane. Unless it was a cross-plane transaction, it was difficult to get such a high-level soul shard. However, cross-plane transactions were quite dangerous, and legendary figures could also encounter all kinds of accidents." The Fallen Witch also frowned. After thinking for a moment she said, "Maybe Soren will have a way. After all, he is a god. He should be able to get a high-level soul shard." There was no way. It was difficult for the two witches to get a soul shard of this level, so in the end the matter was handed over to Soren. When he learned about this, Soren was also very surprised. And it attracted enough attention. Whether it was the Diamond Golem itself or the possibility of opening the door of the Shadow Plains Wizard Tower, it was enough reason for him to take action. He still remembered the basic attributes of the famous Diamond Golem. Name, Diamond Golem, Puppet Golem, Grade 5, highest attribute, 35, requires modification. Lowest attribute, 10. Total attribute, 90 to 115. Special abilities, crushing damage, damage reduction, magic resistance, poison attack. Resistance statistics, strong acid resistance, 100 cold resistance, 100 lightning resistance, 100 fire resistance, 125 crushing resistance, 90 piercing resistance, 90 slashing resistance, 90 ranged resistance, 90 magic resistance, 100 damage immunity, immune to normal weapon attacks, immune to +1 rare weapon attacks, immune to +2 rare weapon attacks, immune to poison attacks, immune to backstab attacks. Challenge difficulty, A++. The Diamond Golem's damage to enemies below the high grade was overwhelming. Needless to say, it could be seen from the terrifying damage reduction. It could be said that a Diamond Golem could single-handedly take on a small army under Soren's command. He had to get the Diamond Golem. Since there was a condition for a large number of troops and such a high-level troop class, how could Soren not be tempted? It was more troublesome for him to get the Soul Crystal, but it was not so troublesome for his demon incarnation because one of the innate abilities of the Balrog was soul assimilation. As long as he killed a quasi-legendary demon and used the soul assimilation to extract the soul energy, he could create high-level soul crystals. If he had the Diamond Golem as the vanguard, Soren might really be able to open the door of the Wizard Tower. Moreover, if he had to deal with those enemies in the future, he could find a way to open the portal and try to airdrop the Diamond Golem to fight. It was a classic tactic of the Wizard City. Of course, the premise was that he had the Diamond Golem. Plans could never keep up with changes. Soren now had to divide his attention. On one hand, he paid attention to the movements of the god of the hunt, Malor, and on the other hand he began to use his demon incarnation to create high-level soul crystals. Soren was determined to get the Diamond Golem that had a natural rune level of 21. Chapter 603. After sleeping all day today, I feel that my energy has recovered a lot. Outer Islands, Mordor City. The strong city wall had been reinforced once. Because of the increasing population, the gate of Mordor City had to be rebuilt. At the same time, two side gates were opened next to the main gate. Today, Mordor City was also a big city with a population of more than 50,000, but the population calculation was different from other cities. There were less than 30,000 citizens recorded in Mordor City. About 20,000 of them were half-elves, and about 10,000 were human citizens. The human citizens were mainly pirates, merchants, and the army. At this time, at the gate of Mordor City, a large number of people had gathered. Even if there was a security team to maintain order, the scene was still a bit chaotic. Now Mordor City had its own order, and people had gradually adapted and assimilated into the daily life here. There was naturally something important that could attract so many people because in addition to the residents of Mordor City, there were also merchants from Port Mordor who were attracted here. There were notices posted on the city wall. Someone was responsible for explaining. Because there were not many people who could read, most of the merchants could understand. Many merchants' eyes were already shining. The first notice was about the census. Mordor City would conduct its first census. All people with citizenship would be registered. Those who had enough contributions to Mordor City would get the title of honorary citizen, enjoy the various welfare and educational resources of Mordor City, and be eligible to run for the official class of Mordor City. The census covered a wide range including half-elves, humans, indigenous slaves, and so on. The civilian class would also be included in the statistics this time, which would be beneficial to the future management of Mordor City. The second notice was about colonial reclamation. As mentioned before, under the arrangement of Sauron, Mordor City was clearing out the nearby indigenous people. Now Sauron had achieved certain results and occupied a lot of land near Mordor City. Sauron had a lot of things to do now. Although Mordor City had its own operating system, the strength to support further colonial reclamation was still not enough. Whether it was population or resources, it was difficult for Mordor City to organize a large-scale expansion in a short time. Moreover, Sauron's focus was still the city of Mordor itself. Instead of blindly expanding his territory, it was better to climb the technology tree in his own nest and perfect a series of measures such as agricultural development and irrigation. According to Sauron's idea, Mordor's agriculture must be a big farm, which was more than 100 years ahead of this world. However, the land that had been conquered could not be wasted. Instead of letting grass grow there, it was better to use it for colonization and reclamation. The decree issued by Mordor City was to rent these lands to others at a ridiculously low price. They would get the resources and protection of Mordor City. They could rent an acre of land for only 1 silver dural. If these lands were farmed for 10 years, then these people could get the permanent right to use them. After the time limit, they could get the deed from the city hall. All the tools for colonial reclamation could be purchased and rented from Mordor City. The cost was completely at cost price, and Mordor City even paid for the transportation. Any colonist could get the protection of Mordor City. After all, the outer islands were still a bit dangerous. It could be said that in this colonization plan, except for the population, that Mordor City would not provide any convenience, everything else could be obtained from Mordor City. Even if you didn't have money, as long as you had enough contributions to Mordor City, you could immediately rent land, tools, and resources from Mordor City. You could even owe money or borrow at very low interest. Of course, this kind of discount was only for those who had contributed enough to Mordor City, such as those soldiers who had military achievements. Land reclamation was tax-exempt for a year. In the next 3 years, only half of the tax was needed. After the calculation of merchants, if a person had more than 100 contribution points in Mordor City, then he only needed 10 Kindler to sit on about 100 acres of land. 10 Kindler could exchange for a small landlord. Although this may require them to develop from scratch, Mordor City could provide them with tools and resources, dispatch troops to protect their safety. All they needed was the initial investment, and then they could manage their land well for 10 years. The merchants smelled a huge business opportunity. For these merchants who could go overseas, 1 or 200 Kindler was nothing at all. They only needed to invest about 100 Kindler to get more than 1,000 acres of land. After 10 years, these lands would completely belong to them. Even if they counted the various investments for reclamation and the various resources that they needed to pay in the first 2 years, they could still realize this huge profit. However, this policy was only open to the citizens of Mordor City. Those who did not have the citizenship of Mordor City could not enjoy all this. However, there were countermeasures. The merchants tried to get the citizenship of Mordor City. Some merchant guilds on the south coast even directly donated money to Mordor City in exchange for contribution points, and then jointly took over more than 1,000 hectares of land in one breath. Other small merchants had no choice but to find a way to get a piece of the pie. They signed a contract with the citizens of Mordor City. They used their funds to invest and share the profits with the contractors. They strived to get enough benefits in this big event in Mordor City. The whole Mordor City was boiling. The news even spread to the south coast in a very short time. Even the Temple of Wealth was moved. They secretly mobilized the Chamber of Commerce under their control and took down more than 10,000 hectares of land in the Mordor City's colonization plan. City Lord's Mansion. Soren sat at his desk and looked at the map in front of him. Next to him was a thick stack of documents with many seals. Small-scale land applications could be handed over to the City Hall, but the number exceeded a certain size. In order to prevent other forces from taking root too deeply near Mordor City, Soren needed to approve it personally. Only common interests could tie others to Soren's chariot. In front of Soren, the center of the map was Mordor City. There were 3 red dots near Mordor City. This was the first batch of land to be reclaimed and colonized. It was more than 300 square kilometers in area. It was planned to develop into 3 medium-sized towns around Mordor City. The second phase of the plan would be further expanded. Eventually, 12 towns would be built around Mordor City like stars. The whole plan. Mordor City was losing money. Just the first batch of investment, Mordor City lost nearly 3,000 Kindler. If it weren't for the merchants on the south coast desperately trying to squeeze in and bringing more than 20,000 Kindler to Soren, he would need to invest more resources now. This was a money-losing plan. In addition to Mordor City itself, all the participants were beneficiaries. As long as they could get the land, they could exchange it for huge profits in the future at a very small price. With Soren's god-level computing ability, after the final statistics were completed, he came to a general conclusion. If this phase of the reclamation and colonization plan was completed, Mordor City would lose about 150,000 Kindler, and during this time, the only source of income for Mordor City was the relatively meager tax. But this money-losing plan would also bring a huge benefit, that was, it would attract a large number of people to come here. After the merchants got the land, they would naturally find ways to operate it. Such a large land must be managed by trusted people. Mordor City had no labor to supply them, so they had to spend money to hire labor from other places or buy slaves to work. Now the land was wasteland. A wasteland needed a lot of labor and tools to grow from nothing. Mordor City would provide the tools for reclamation, but other things still needed to be prepared by people themselves. Everything needed investment, and the most important investment was the population. Soren's credibility was well known all over the world. Although some merchants realized that Mordor City had been losing money, they finally couldn't resist the temptation and chose to believe in Soren's promise. The whole plan was to lose money in exchange for development. Soren directly used money in exchange for the second large-scale expansion of Mordor City. But this time, he distributed the benefits to the ordinary people, and the citizens of Mordor City could get a share of it. The interests of Mordor City itself and the surrounding rich land were still firmly in his own hands. This was an opportunity. It was also a signal to the outside world. Mordor City, which was close to saturation, attracted the attention of countless people in an instant. Mordor City was equivalent to an independent small kingdom. And the population here was Soren's population. For a god, the number of people would never be too much. It was also on this day. After Soren arranged all the plans, a row of data unexpectedly appeared in front of him. Comprehension of law. Transformation of godhood. You've obtained some information about the domain of rule. Ability upgrade. You've automatically comprehended a new domain, rule. Chapter 604. I'll post the photos on the public WeChat account, pick the funniest one and send it out. Search for Buddha on WeChat and you'll see it. It was a little unexpected. Although Soren had received information about rule in the past, even he didn't expect that after issuing the series of decrees, he would automatically master the rule domain. Soren's identity was the Lord of Mordor, and he was also a god served by the half-elf church. From the perspective of a god, Soren was deeply involved with the secular world. Most of the time he was more like a ruler than a god. This was probably the key to his understanding of the rule domain. The development of Mordor was inseparable from his rule, and the order of the south coast was inseparable from his rule. For a long time, some kind of power had been gathering in him, and this time's decree had just reached the critical point of eruption. Rule, divine domain. Your absolute rule has been recognized by most people. People are full of recognition for your wise leadership, which makes you master the power of faith in the secular world. When your rule is recognized by others, or when ordinary people feel happy, the effect similar to prayer will appear. The weak power of faith will automatically transform into your divine power. This domain allows you to rule people more easily. When you negotiate with anyone, you will gain an additional 100 negotiation points. Remark, the ruler's right to speak. Passive domain. Power, tyranny, rule, and other prerequisites of the clergy, a passive domain that could automatically transform divine power. At this moment, even Soren himself was surprised. This was a divine domain that didn't provide any combat ability. The only function was that with Soren's rule, the people under his rule would automatically gather a power of faith. This power of faith could improve Soren's divine power. Whether as a god or a ruler, Soren's name had long been deeply imprinted in their hearts, and the biggest role of the rule domain was to transform this imprint into a substantial power of faith. In the sky, Soren's spiritual projection appeared above the city of Moder. He felt another kind of call. It was not the prayer of the half-elf church because it was much weaker than the prayer ceremony. However, the number of this call was huge. It seemed that all the residents of the city of Mordor had weak threads. Whenever they thought of the existence of Soren or mentioned the name of Soren, a very weak power of faith would automatically gather. Perhaps it was very small, but it could not be ignored. Soren could feel tens of thousands of threads connecting to his mind, especially after the announcement of the new development order. It had only been a day. Even without praying, Soren had already accumulated 2 divine power points. Domination was based on the foundation of the half-elf church, so Soren's daily divine power points increased by 1. This discovery made Soren even more determined, because according to this progress before the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, he would have enough divine power points to master the ability of changing reality and changing space. The more passive domains, the better. The more domains he had, the faster his divine power points would increase. Some powerful gods had many domains. For example, Lolth, the queen of spiders, had a large number of domains and domains. Soren also needed to move in this direction. The city of wealth. A merchant ship set off quietly. This merchant ship didn't seem to be anything special, but if someone paid attention they could still find a problem. There was too much food stored on this ship. In order to make enough profit, the merchant ship must have enough space to carry goods. How much could they make by carrying so much food? How much did we transport this time? As they left the port of the city of wealth, the sailors on the deck seemed to be relieved. Then a middle-aged man dressed as a rich businessman came over and asked another person, "Now the labor force in Mordor is very popular." The one who answered him was a powerful warrior. He looked a bit like a gang member. After asking his subordinates, he said, "We have about 100 or 200 people this time. Don't worry. All of them are illegal residents and slaves. If it weren't for the fact that they had no money, they would have rushed over to Mordor to make money. Now it's chaotic outside. There are monsters everywhere. If not, there is war. It's good that these people can survive. The next batch will definitely bring a lot of people." Mordor City. Today's Mordor City had gradually replaced the status of the City of Wealth. Everyone on the south coast knew that it was quite rich. It was said that Sir Soren was so extravagant that the slaves could eat their fill every day. The continent was gradually becoming chaotic. The life of the civilian class was getting harder and harder. Now that such a thing happened in Mordor City, naturally many people wanted to mix in. The environment in the outer islands may be a lot worse, but at least Mordor City would not be at war. Even a beggar on the south coast now knew that Mordor City was the most powerful city on the sea. The war on the mainland would not affect Mordor City. Okay. The rich businessman nodded and said, "I'll transfer another ship to you after a while. You can find a way to transport more people over. Aren't there refugees in the south? You just have to bring them over. These refugees don't need to be paid. Just give them food and they can work. But you have to choose. Forget about the old, weak, sick, and disabled. We only need young and strong people who can work over there." The burly man replied, "I know. I won't fool you with the old, weak, sick, and disabled. Besides, those people can't survive this sea route." Sailing was not something that everyone could endure. The rich businessman smiled with satisfaction and stuffed a small bag of kindler into the other party's hand. The burly man weighed it and put it into his arms with a smile. Mordor City's development plan this time would lose 150,000 Kindler. Could be said that most of the participants could make money. Things that could make money were naturally very attractive. Now the south coast was full of people looking for business opportunities. Get them some food and send it down? The rich businessman stood on the deck for a while and felt a little tired. He ordered the others, get enough food and let them all eat. I don't have time to delay. They have to come down and work when they get there. Soon someone went to work. The rich businessman said a few words and returned to the cabin. Speaking of which, there was one thing that these businessmen criticized in Mordor City at the beginning. That was even the slaves in Mordor City ate well. According to the businessman's point of view, these people would not starve to death. There was no need to pay extra expenses. However, this rule did not work well in Mordor City. Although there was no explicit rule, the unspoken rule of Mordor City was that even slaves could not be starved at will. This seemed to be an unspoken rule formed by Sir Soren's personal preference. Just like how clean and tidy Mordor City was, many people thought that Sir Soren had misophobia. The law in Mordor City was strict. Here, even privately owned slaves could not be killed at will. Otherwise they would be punished. It might be a large fine or even the owner himself would be whipped. 3 whips, they didn't know what to say. Anyway, all the businessmen who had been to Mordor City felt that this place was different from any city they had ever seen. Chapter 605. Bottomless Abyss, the third layer of the Forgotten Land. Outside the Galumba arena was a broken street. The prosperity of the past had long disappeared. After the death of the demon lord Myamide, the town fell apart at a very fast speed. Many of the demons in the neutral camp had left here. The war affected their business. Whether it was the Ross demons or the night witches, they all went to safer places for the time being. Currently, a tripartite situation had already formed outside the arena. The most powerful one was undoubtedly the Balrog Sauron. At first, people thought that he would quickly defeat the other demons and then occupy the entire Galumba arena. But what others did not expect was that Sauron the Beheader actually began to gather his forces. During this time he stayed in the Lava Tavern. However, this peace had now been broken. Boom! A violent explosion sounded outside the Galumba arena. At the position where the Baler's body was nailed, a group of demons was fighting. Fireball. Sauron exuded a terrifying aura. He raised his hand and blasted out a fireball. The instantaneous fireball of the Balrog every day was very lethal. With Sauron's current ability of instantaneous fireball 5 times a day, he was basically a human-shaped self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. He had a crushing advantage over the middle and low-grade demons. Behind him was a group of Hezru and Berserk demons. In order to control these subordinates and increase the consumption of cannon fodder, Sauron subdued a lot of simple-minded demons. The succubus lady boss of the tavern also stood behind him, but these succubi didn't join the battle. Sword form, beheading. A 4-armed snake demon fell under Sauron's sword. The other demons were afraid of his strength and retreated. At this time, from behind the enemy, a 6-armed snake demon and a judgment demon appeared. Summon demon. Dominate demon. Sauron's powerful strength inadvertently made other high-grade demons feel afraid, so when Sauron attacked them, the 2 high-grade demons of legendary strength immediately united together. On the battlefield, it was obvious that there were more demons in the enemy camp, but when Sauron launched Summon Demon, a small accident happened. This accident suddenly led to the reversal of the situation on the battlefield. Sauron summoned a Balrog. It must be explained in detail here. As a powerful high-grade demon, Sauron's own Summon Demon ability also improved. In the beginning, when he was only in the form of a Dretch, he could only summon the lowest level of Dretch. When he advanced into the form of a Flame Demon, he could summon demons of a lower level or Berserk demons of similar strength. At this time, Sauron summoned of demons, 2 to 5 demons and 1 to 2 Berserk demons. When Sauron's strength advanced into the form of a Balrog, there was no doubt that his Summon Demon ability was improved again. Summon Demon, innate ability. As a high-grade demon, you can summon other demons to help you fight. You will be able to summon 4 to 8 Dretches, 2 to 4 Berserk demons, 1 to 2 Flame demons, or 25% chance to summon another Balrog. This ability is equivalent to a level 8 summoning spell. The summoned demons may attack you. The more powerful the demon, the more likely it is to ignore your orders. You can rely on the ability of Dominate Demon to control them. Even Sauron himself did not expect that he would summon another Balrog. In an instant, Sauron felt a strong will of resistance. As a Balrog of the same level, the one summoned by Sauron obviously did not intend to listen to his orders. Perhaps this Balrog responded to his summon more to kill and fight. The bottomless abyss had a strong will of chaos. Any summoning spell could fail, but if it succeeded, some demons would be forcibly summoned even if they did not want to. At this time, it required the strength and will of both sides to collide. But it did not matter. Sauron was not afraid of the collision of will. Dominate demon? When he used his innate ability of Dominate Demon, the Balrog in front of him immediately had a fierce mental confrontation with Sauron. The final winner was undoubtedly him. The will of the Balrog was suppressed by him. Two Balrogs, one on the left and one on the right, two legendary Balrogs surrounded the enemies in front of them that were nearly twice their number. Body of flame. The raging flames raged out. Sauron and the other Balrog activated their innate abilities at the same time. However, there was still a little difference between the two. Sauron's body of flame covered a larger area, and his strength was obviously higher than the other Balrogs. The other Balrogs had looked like a minotaur, but with huge demon horns. The other party's body was nearly 4 meters tall, which was taller than Sauron. The upper body was as strong as a minotaur and the lower body, especially the feet, were simply hooves. There was also a tail on the Balrog's buttocks, and the demon's wings were much larger than Sauron's. Compared to that, Sauron looked closer to a human shape. The outline of his face was still human, but his ears were quite pointed. There was a mysterious demon tattoo on his naked chest. There was no tail on his buttocks and his feet were not hooves. This Balrog was a standard Balrog. Strictly speaking, Sauron's Balrog form was a variant that changed because of his own will. There was almost no difficulty in the battle. Originally, Sauron was still in danger when he fought a 6-armed snake demon and a soul verdict at the same time. However, when he summoned another Balrog, the battle became not difficult at all. Sauron won. The 6-armed snake demon died at his hands, but because his body needed high-level soul crystals, he had to give up absorbing the demon's power and used soul assimilation to create a diamond golem. The soul verdict died at the hands of another Balrog. It was also killed with soul assimilation. Sauron got 2 high-level soul crystals in one breath. The outside of the Golumba arena had been completely conquered by him. After killing a group of middle-grade demons, the rest of the cannon fodder surrendered and became his captives. This should be the easiest battle for Sauron since he came to the abyss. There was no difficulty at all. The 2 Balrogs completely crushed the whole field. The casualties on his side were less than 1/10 of the enemies, and Sauron didn't even use his big move. Balrog, Khos'ran. After getting rid of all the enemies, Sauron cancelled the control of the other Balrog. In a simple exchange, Sauron knew that this was a Balrog from the 19th floor of the abyss. It responded to Sauron's summon only because it was bored, but after the battle was over. However, after the battle, Sauron reached a deal with it, or rather, a summoning contract that was beneficial to both sides. In return, Sauron gave it a bottle of magma dragon's blood. The content of the contract between the 2 Balrogs was that Sauron could summon it when he needed it, and Sauron had to respond to its summons as much as possible. A simple alliance was formed. The success rate of this alliance was about 50% because the abyss itself had the interference of the chaotic will. Even if they formed an alliance, the success rate of summoning another Balrog could only be increased to 50%. Chapter 606. The battle was over. Because he accidentally summoned another Balrog, Sauron easily took over all the territories outside the Golumba arena. Now, the only thing stopping him from controlling the Golumba arena was the demonic goblins hiding inside the arena. The huge circular arena was like a fortress. Even with Sauron's ability, it was difficult to conquer it. He needed a large number of cannon fodder to break through the defense line of the demonic goblins. Otherwise, he might be surrounded and killed by the enemy. After all, the demonic incarnation was not the main body. With the strength of the main body, he could naturally leave and stay as he wished. However, this demonic incarnation did not have any professional abilities. It was completely dependent on the innate power of the Balrog. If it was surrounded, it would be a dead end. However, Sauron also had his own way, which was to make a deal with the neutral evil demons. For Sauron, the wealth of the abyss was nothing. He did not care about the territories outside the Golumba arena. Therefore, after he defeated the other greater demons, he immediately gathered all the neutral evil demons. He was ready to make a deal with these evil demons. The content of the deal was the territories outside the Golumba arena. The next day in the Lava Tavern. The first to come to the Lava Tavern was a greater Anababa. She controlled the weapons trade outside the Golumba arena. Then came the Night Witches, Nagros demons, Lesser Rasi demons, and so on. Almost all the neutral evil demons outside the arena were gathered here by Sauron. The tavern was very quiet. The flirtatious lady boss stood behind Sauron, her fingers gently pressing on his shoulder. It had to be said that these succubus really knew how to please males. This skill was not only limited to the pleasure in bed, but also included other aspects. The succubus naturally knew how to satisfy the male's desire to conquer everyone. Sauron stood up and looked around. Finally, his eyes fell on the Anababa in front of him. This Anababa was not simple. It was said that she came from the Azura realm and later changed her business to the Abyss. In addition, the secondary Ross Devils were also very powerful. The Ross Devils had a huge trading network. Even the smuggling trade in the Abyss Blood War was done by them. After pausing for a moment, he said in a deep voice, "I intend to make a deal with you. This is the content of the contract. If you are interested, you might as well take a look." In the bottomless abyss, only the Nether River contract was binding. Demons were not as trustworthy as demons. Things like going back on their word often happened. The demons of the neutral evil camp had long learned their lesson. They would never believe a contract that did not have anything to do with the river Styx. A contract was passed into the hands of the other evil spirits. The first to receive it was the high-grade Anababa. She glanced at it, and a hint of surprise appeared on her ugly face. She slowly said, "Sir Sauron. So you're saying that if we help you take down the Golumba arena, you'll give us the territories outside?" Sauron silently observed the expressions of the other demons. After everyone looked around, he slowly nodded and said, "That's right. If you help me take down the Golumba arena, all the territories outside will belong to you. Not only these territories, but I'll also give you half of the profits from the casino after the arena reopens." The demons were very powerful. The demons present were all engaged in planar transactions. If they did not travel to other levels of the bottomless abyss, they would directly go to the bottomless abyss, the Bator Inferno, and the Azura field to trade. These demons had guards and mercenaries. Because of their neutral nature, they liked to do business, but they did not like to be involved in the disputes of demons. Sauron wanted to use the demons' guards and mercenaries to kill the demons and goblins in one fell swoop. In return, he would give all the territories except for the Lava Tavern Street to these demons as a reward. Any order required wealth and power to maintain. Sauron did not lack either. As long as these demons were willing to fight, they would be able to receive generous rewards. The bottomless abyss was not a material plane. Sauron's main body had been operating in the material plane for a long time and could easily mobilize a large number of people. However, his demon incarnation could not do this. If he wanted to take down the Golumba arena, he would need the help of these demons. Moreover, a successful trade could gain the demons' trust. The reason why demons rarely appeared in the bottomless abyss was that many demons were willing to deal with demons rather than demons. It could be said that the trade of all the planes in the bottomless abyss could not compare to the first level of the Bator Inferno. Chaos was a disaster by nature. The demons in front of Sauron made a decision because Sauron gave them an irresistible temptation. "I need more people." After the high-grade Anababa signed the contract, she turned around and looked at the other demons. Her gaze stopped on the secondary Ross demons for a while. She seemed to be provoking them. "My sister is doing business in Bloodtown in the first level of the bottomless abyss. If we want to take down the Golumba arena, we need to hire some mercenaries from there." The secondary Ross demons bowed slightly to Sauron and said slowly, "Your Excellency Sauron. According to the contract, I will gather at least 500 subordinates. My family is the Lord of the Azura field. Seems that I need to go back. This was a war. It was impossible to take down the Golumba arena with just the thousands of demons that Sauron had subdued, because it was occupied by all the demons and goblins. Although they were now without a leader, the goblins had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. There were originally tens of thousands of demons and goblins in the Golumba arena. After the initial chaos, the demons that had been suppressed for a long time went berserk. The number of goblins decreased by a few thousand, but now there were still an army of 5,000 to 6,000. It was impossible for Sauron to take down the arena with just his cannon fodder. The only way to take down the arena quickly was to rely on the guards and mercenaries of the demons. After eliminating these demons and goblins, Sauron could be considered to have taken over the arena. However, if he wanted to become the demon lord that completely controlled the Golumba arena, there was still a problem in front of Sauron, and that was the abyssal demon dragon that occupied the nearby lava volcano. It was the ally of the former demon lord, Miamide, Calamity Coin. The thoughts of the abyssal demon dragon were hard to guess. Sauron might be able to form an alliance with it, but he might also need to personally kill it. Everything depended on the attitude of the abyssal demon dragon. Chapter 607. With the arrival of summer and autumn, the climate of Mordor City gradually changed. At the port, a fishing boat full of seafood returned, and soon a group of laborers who made a living on the dock came to carry it. Buckets of fresh fish were sent to the shore, and there were already many merchants waiting there. Because it was a coastal city, the price of seafood in Mordor City was quite cheap, and the supply was quite large. In Mordor City, the rich class rarely ate seafood. These fresh fish were more supplied to the lower-class civilians and the laborers who migrated to Mordor City to work. Even slaves could often eat fish. The rich disliked the fishy smell of seafood, and even they couldn't afford spices that could temper the fishy smell. That thing was sometimes equivalent to gold of the same weight. Old Jack. A rich businessman approached the fishing boat, looked at it for a while and said slowly, "Send me a batch of fish. Did you catch any sharks this time? Give me one if you did." Shark meat was the cheapest. For some reason, except for a small part of the shark, the other parts were only eaten by the lower class, so the price was naturally the cheapest. Yes. An old man with a beard nodded and quickly ordered someone to send it over. During this time, many outsiders came to Mordor City, and the consumption of all kinds of food was very high. Because the price of fish had always been very cheap, the sales were very high, so this was the third time they went out to sea this week. The sailors were busy. Taking advantage of today's rest, many of them walked towards the tavern with their arms around each other's shoulders. Old Jack scolded them and then said seriously, "Don't gamble. Leave some money to marry a woman. If you lose it all, just wait to be an old bachelor." 3 or 5 sailors nodded with a smile. Old Jack was a very good person. No one would have thought that he had been a bloody pirate. A stable life and the law of Mordor City had worn away his hostility. He just wanted to make more money while he still had some strength to leave some property for little Jack. The deputy went to do the next thing. Old Jack walked around the street a few times, and then quietly entered an alley. A man hidden in the shadows was waiting for him. Nothing unusual recently. Old Jack's expression became serious, and there was even a faint murderous aura. He said in a deep voice, "There is a businessman named Endry who is a little strange. You can ask the higher-ups to send someone to investigate." The man in the shadows nodded and picked up a pen to record it. Then he slowly said, "I understand. You can leave now." Old Jack nodded and turned to walk out of the alley. There were a group of retired pirates in Mordor City. Most of them were not young or had been injured. After retiring, these people began to live the lives of ordinary people. However, some of the elites were still inextricably linked to the intelligence organization that Sauron had secretly set up. These people were Sauron's informants. Nothing in the city of Mordor could escape his eyes. Even in other places, there were many people like Old Jack who were sent out. It was still early. Old Jack stood at the dock and thought for a moment, then turned and walked towards the sea temple. During this time, the fishing in Mordor City was quite rich. Maybe the blessing of the sea goddess had taken effect. Whether it was out of respect or gratitude to the gods, Old Jack was used to donating to the sea temple from time to time. Now the scale of the sea temple has expanded a lot. Because of the blessings of the sea goddess, the sea temple finally tied with the Temple of Wealth. There were many believers at the entrance of the sea temple. Old Jack subconsciously looked around before entering. With informants like them, even the Temple of Wealth and the Sea Temple were within the scope of surveillance. Because in Mordor City, no power could be out of control. Sir Sauron allowed the 2 churches to develop their faith here, but he would never allow their power to go out of control. This was a boundary between the gods and the churches. The City Lord's mansion. After spending nearly a week, Sauron finally got the exact information. The location of the god of the hunt, Mailer. North of Whiterun City at the junction of the Elven Forest, near the barren highlands in the north, a territory of the orcs. The belief of the god of the hunt was spread all over the world. Therefore, his church's believers were relatively special and rarely moved in civilized areas. So this time, in order to determine his location, Sauron also spent a lot of effort. Originally, he wanted to ask Gloria to use prophecy to locate the location, but the cost of using prophecy to locate a god was too great. In the end, he could only find it slowly, but he didn't expect to determine the specific location of the target so quickly. The Avatar crisis was coming. Many of the more scheming gods hid first, just like the Queen of Spiders, Lolth. No one could determine where she was until now. Now that the god of the hunt, Malor, had exposed his whereabouts, the plan against him could begin. The Shadow Plane. Gloria, who was working in the laboratory, suddenly raised her head, and then a teleportation spell appeared outside. She frowned slightly and said, "What triggered the alarm trap I set?" A series of spells appeared. To be on the safe side, Gloria first blessed herself with many spells, and then walked to the edge of the wizard tower. Since this place was an important target of the attack, the two witches had set up a large number of alarm spells nearby to prevent other creatures from the Shadow Plane from running over. Gloria's footsteps suddenly stopped. She frowned and looked at the sight in front of her. She murmured, "Are these the feathers of the Shadow Raven?" Feathers and blood. There were obvious traces of battle nearby. The Shadow Raven was a creature they had seen before, a huge raven that lived in this plane. The combat power of this thing was not much lower than that of the dragon subspecies. Dragon scale? Gloria carefully walked over and reached out to pick up a scale on the ground. It was a light gray scale that was close to translucent. It looked a bit like the scale of a black dragon, but the size of the scale was only the size of a fingernail. It didn't look like it came from a huge adult dragon, but more like a young dragon that had transitioned to its youth. Gloria was stunned for a moment, and then said with an excited expression, "Is there a young dragon nearby?" This was the scale of a shadow dragon. It was a kind of dragon that lived in the Shadow Plane. It was an earth-type dragon that was sinister and cunning. It rarely appeared in other worlds, but it would occasionally appear in the Underdark. There was a lot of blood nearby. However, there was no corpse of the Shadow Raven, which meant that in the battle that happened not long ago, the dragon didn't have any advantage. Under the siege of an adult dragon, it shouldn't be difficult to kill one or two Shadow Ravens. The only explanation for this situation was that the Shadow Dragon that was besieged by the Shadow Ravens was at most a young dragon. No. Gloria quickly set up a spell nearby, and then walked toward the teleportation gate. She murmured, "I have to tell Soren about this." If there was a young dragon nearby, then there was a lot of things that could be done. Of course, the purpose was not to kill it. A young dragon didn't have enough wealth, and the wealth of a dragon was accumulated over a long period of time. To deal with such a young dragon, Gloria felt that there was a high possibility that they could subdue or control it. The blood of a dragon was also a good subject for research. As a neutral northern witch, Gloria didn't mind catching it and releasing some dragon blood from time to time. Maybe it was because she had been with Soren for too long. Gloria also began to deviate a little bit from the evil faction. The discovery of the northern witch quickly alarmed Soren and the fallen witch. Capturing an immature shadow dragon wasn't much of a problem for the true form of a god and two legendary witches. Therefore, Soren quickly decided to settle this matter first. Dragons had a wide range of activities, but as long as this young shadow dragon appeared near the wizard tower, Soren could still find it with a little effort. As for the next matter, it was easy to handle. One of them was the true body of a deity, while the other two were legendary witches. I'm just asking you if you're scared. Chapter 608. The light of dawn shone down. A peaceful day in Mordor began again. Busy people began to prepare for work, and there was a faint sound of children playing in their ears. Rainboard tidied up his clothes, reached for the curved sword that was mixed with a trace of mithril, and turned to walk towards his post. He was a half-drow, and he had been in Mordor for some time. As a drow ranger, he was the first to follow the chief warrior here. From time to time, people greeted him on the road, and Rainboard nodded and smiled slightly. He had always hoped to change people's views on the drows. Maybe other places were still hostile to the drows, but Mordor had accepted them. There were not many female drows in Mordor. These stubborn female drows still gathered around the priest. For a long time, the concept of male inferiority still made it difficult for them to recognize the status of other male drows. It was difficult to change thousands of years of tradition in a short time. That was why those damn female drows rejected Mordor, and also rejected these male drows who were getting higher and higher in status. Rainboard knew all of this. He knew why the chief priest had been unwilling to completely get close to Mordor. Because when the Dark Maiden fell, although she died in the hands of her mother, there was still something left. Just recently, the female drows had contacted the Underdark, and they seemed to have received some help. At least when he went back last time, he saw some specialties from the Underdark. Rainboard was a half-drow. In fact, almost all those who stayed in Mordor and had a strong sense of identity with Mordor were half-drow. Many of those who stayed in their original groups were pure-blooded drows, and the people they could influence. Rainboard liked it here. Mordor gave him a way to exchange his strength for status, instead of having to work hard like in the past. Even if he made countless efforts, his status was always lower than those female priests. There were many curious eyes on the road. There were only 100 or 200 drows in Mordor, all of whom were first-class elites. From time to time, outsiders would be surprised to see them. Rainboard was used to it. People greeted him all the time on the road, and some invited him to drink in the evening, but Rainboard refused. He did not touch alcohol. As a warrior who was strict with himself, Rainboard was very demanding of himself. He hoped to enter the realm of legends one day. As a high-grade professional who had just advanced, this possibility was still very high. Lord Rainboard. At the corner of the street, a somewhat timid voice sounded in Rainboard's ears. This gentle voice made him stop in his tracks. When he turned around, his cold face couldn't help but reveal a trace of a smile. He said softly, "Lucina? Good morning." A young and immature girl. Her ears were slightly pointed, which meant that she was a half-elf. "You haven't had breakfast yet, have you?" A faint blush appeared on the little girl's fair face. She timidly handed him a lunchbox and shyly said, "This is for you. I won't disturb you anymore. I'll head back first." When the other gnomes saw this, some of them gave kind laughs, which made the little girl's footsteps become even more frantic. Even Rainboard himself couldn't help blushing slightly, but he was very dark, so no one could see anything. Because their image in people's eyes was already very bad, after coming to live in Mordor, the drow warrior had been strict with them. If anything out of line happened, the warrior would even personally whip the offender. Therefore, the drow warriors in Mordor gave people the impression that they were serious, strict, rigid, cold, and so on. That was the feeling that Rainboard gave people before. For a long time, although the drow warriors were accepted by Mordor, they did not really integrate into the people. Others were afraid of them and carefully kept a distance from them. This situation was until one thing happened. Demon invasion. The disciples of fear summoned demons in Mordor, causing great damage to the city and killing many innocent people. That day, Rainboard also joined the battle. As a high-grade drow warrior, he discovered the demons immediately and protected the civilians near the street where he lived. At the same time, he also killed a Hezru in a bloody battle and saved a little half-elf girl. That was the girl just now. For this reason, he lost an arm, and it was the priest of the temple who cast limb regeneration on him to recover. Everything changed. Rainboard suddenly found that people around him began to treat him kindly, and even the ant next door would help him clean the yard from time to time. Every morning, people began to greet him. Although Rainboard only nodded slightly in response many times, people seemed to have gotten used to and accepted his serious attitude. All along, the drows lacked a chance to prove themselves, and the demon invasion made many people agree with them. "It seems that the little girl is interested in you." There was a teasing voice from his companions. Facing the teasing of his companions, Rainboard thought seriously and said seriously, "If I can, I want to marry her." Everyone was surprised. Then there was the noise of other guards. Many of these people were pirates, and their temperament was not as calm as the drow warriors. Rainboard liked the little girl. As a drow warrior with strong self-esteem, he hated the female drows in the tribe. Strong, domineering, rude, arrogant. Rainboard could use many words to describe his views on female drows, because since he was a child, female drows had left a huge shadow in his heart. His ideal opposite sex should be someone like Lucina. If he liked her, he would marry her. As a serious drow warrior, Rainboard thought so. The handover was completed quickly. Rainboard led a team of people to guard outside a building. This was the core forbidden area of Mordor, and even he did not enter. Every day there were 3 drow warriors leading the team to guard day and night. No one was allowed to enter here except for Sir Soren, the 2 witches, and Miss Vivian. They were the guards outside, and there were many magic traps inside. There had always been many enemies who wanted to spy on the secrets, but these people ended up miserable. Everything seemed to be the same. But today, when Rainboard was patrolling outside a house, he suddenly felt his heart beat faster and his hair stood up. He could not help but tense up and enter a combat state. At the same time, he pressed his hand on the hilt of his sword. There was an invisible aura. There must be something locked up in this house. When Rainboard turned to look at the others around him, he suddenly found that everyone had the same expression. Dragon's aura? A man who claimed that 8 of his ribs had been broken by a white dragon suddenly jumped up. His voice was slightly excited and trembling. He said excitedly, "I will never be wrong. This must be the feeling of the dragon's aura." This man was called Boater. A very rare name. He used to be an elite pirate troop, but now he was transferred to guard the forbidden area of Mordor. This was a talkative man. However, he had a good relationship with others. He liked to drink and brag. His favorite thing to do was to take off his shirt in the tavern after getting drunk, revealing the huge scar on his chest. He would tell others how he followed Sir Soren to slay dragons, and then how he was hit by an adult white dragon's tail. After 8 of his ribs were broken, he still survived tenaciously. This was an old pirate. The real elite of Mordor, the elite of the elite. Even Rainboard was not sure if he could beat him. He was one of the few survivors of the White Dragon battle. Day and night alternated. The people of Mordor were performing every day. The tavern was always the most lively place. Here you could hear a one-armed old man telling people how they fought the Swamp King in an absolute disadvantage. Here you might also meet a guy who liked to take off his shirt and brag that he had been hit by an adult dragon. There were such stories every day. From the naval battle of the Son of Dagon, the fall of the Swamp King, the decisive battle of Raging Sand Island, the dragon-slaying battle, against the indigenous people, against the fleet of the southern island countries, against the cruel and ferocious Vrykul pirates, to the expedition to Autumnfall and so on. You can't get enough of the stories here. They were all warriors and they were also survivors. Maybe they would die in some places in the future, but they would leave their own shadows in these stories. Mordor. This rising city in the outer islands was like a star. Its glory belonged to Soren, but it also belonged to these unknown people. This was the soul of Mordor. P.S. I suddenly felt like writing, so I added a short paragraph. Chapter 609. Author's note. I'm brewing a wave of climax and I'm feeling it a little, but it's not in place yet. You should be used to it because every time you reach a certain plot point, Futu has to prepare for it. Was it really the dragon's might? Rainboard felt the chill all over his body and suddenly found that it was indeed very similar to the legendary dragon's might. The most common dragon in Mordor City was the wyvern raised by Miss Vivian. This was a dragon subspecies, and it also had a very faint dragon's might. Ordinary people might be scared and unable to move. Before Rainboard advanced to a high-grade profession, he had encountered such a situation a little, but later he slowly got used to it. The dragon's might was not enough to affect the strong-willed drow warrior. Someone is coming over there. A dark guard with a few whips on his head suddenly said. His name was Zagud, which was a very good name. Unlike the other guards, Zagud spoke with a strong indigenous accent. He was a strong and burly indigenous man. There was a slave brand on his cheek, which meant that he was once a slave gladiator of the lowest status. Zagud was also a small legend in Mordor City. As an indigenous slave, he was forced to mix from a slave gladiator to the most important forbidden area guard in Mordor City. Many slaves took him as an example and regarded him as an idol. Mordor City was such a magical place. Anyone had the opportunity to climb up step by step. Even slaves without freedom could become honorary citizens of Mordor City, or even gain a higher status. This was the soul of Mordor City. A kind of urban heritage that gradually brewed and precipitated over time. When it really took shape, the rules of Mordor City would also be imprinted in it. Soft footsteps. The forbidden areas of Mordor City were all guarded by high-grade professions. Perhaps there were not many spellcasters in Mordor City, but there were quite a lot of high-grade melee professions in Mordor City. From the beginning, they pacified the other pirate kings, then intervened in Arendel's battle with the army of the southern island countries, then went on an expedition to Autumnfall to fight against the orcs, and finally cleared many indigenous tribes in the outer islands. The battles trained the elites of Mordor City. The men who survived the battle all worked hard to hone themselves. Only a battle of life and death could make them understand how important their own strength was. In the power net of Mordor City, although the number of high-grade spellcasters was less than 2 digits, the number of high-grade melee professions could reach 4 digits. It could be said that no force in the entire material plane had more high-grade melee professions than Soren. Of course, there was no force more capable and experienced more battles than the pirates under Sauron's command. Even now, when it was close to the time of construction, the city of Mordor still had 3 legions stationed outside to fight against the indigenous people. A fleet blocked the sea near the Amazon jungle, and the battle to clear out the indigenous tribes had never stopped. The guards of the Forbidden Zone were dispatched from these elites, and the loyalty of any one of them could withstand the test. The only pity was that, although Mordor City had a large number of high-grade professions, there was still not a single legendary-level warrior. Mordor City had a base of more than 1,000 high-grade professions with a profession level of 15. They were all small pirate leaders and other elite troops that had been trained in battles. But so far, among all the melee professions in Mordor City, no one had entered the realm of legend. The only one who was closest to the realm of legend was the pirate leader, Giant, then Scarface and One-Eyed Dragon. Even the pirate leaders under Sorin's command still had not stepped into the realm of legend. It was estimated that among these people, it would be amazing if 1 in 100 could advance into the realm of legend. Who? Rainboard quickly found the person, but when he saw the other party's appearance, he immediately bowed his head slightly and said respectfully, "Your Excellency High Priest." The person who came was the High Priest of Mordor City. She was the leader of the Half-Elf Church, a powerful psionic warlock and a priest. Her status was second only to the Mistress Gloria and Miss Vivian. Perhaps to avoid suspicion, the High Priest only managed the church's affairs and did not intervene in the operation of the Mordor City Council at all. However, no one dared to underestimate her status. "You two stay here." Behind the High Priestess were 2 young priestesses. One of them was quite famous because she was a saint priestess. Hearing the High Priest's instructions, the 2 young female priests nodded respectfully. Immediately afterward, the High Priest walked towards the Forbidden Zone and nodded slightly. "My lord summoned me for something. Be careful and don't let anyone come close." Rainboard said seriously, "Yes, I understand." The Forbidden Zone was an important secret of Mordor City. The High Priest naturally knew how important the Wizard Tower in the Shadow Plane was, but this time she came for something else. Faint Dragon's Aura. The High Priest was already very familiar with the dragon's aura. She turned and entered a warehouse, then saw Sorin and Gloria standing at the door. "My lord." The High Priest bowed slightly, glanced at the shadow dragon trapped in chains in front of her, and whispered, "Is this what you're looking for me for?" Sorin's will forcibly suppressed the shadow dragon in front of him. He turned and glanced at the High Priest behind him and slowly said, "Yes. I'll leave it to you." It was an underage shadow dragon. It was probably about to reach its youth. Its size was only about 7 meters and its bloodline was very pure. It should be the offspring of the shadow dragon. There was a circle of chains wrapped around its huge dragon body with simple runes on it, which could restrict its movements. The pride of the dragon made it difficult to tame them. Sorin didn't want to waste too much time, so he tied it up directly after finding the target. The battle was not worth mentioning. A god's body and 2 legendary witches. It would be strange if it wasn't easy. After seeing the High Priest, Gloria nodded slightly, dispelled the spell, and then teleported away. Sorin had already brought back the high-grade soul crystals. During this time, she was busy researching how to make the diamond golem with her mother. In addition, they also found a book in the War Chest Plains library, which introduced something called the Supreme Golem. Gloria and Fallen which were quite curious about this kind of golem. The High Priest gently came in front of the shadow dragon. She could feel the anger and uneasiness of the little guy in front of her. After a simple telepathic contact, she nodded slightly and said, "There should be no problem, but it may take some time." Taming a purebred dragon was very troublesome. On the surface, subduing it was not what Sorin wanted. What he needed was a dragon that would not hesitate to follow his orders. Therefore, this matter could only be done by the High Priest. Because she was a powerful psionic warlock, she could control the minds of other creatures, change their thoughts and control their consciousness. In the whole material plane, no one was better than her. Sorin nodded with satisfaction. He did not care about spending a little more time, but his control of the shadow dragon must be firm enough. After handing over the matter of taming the dragon to the High Priest, Sorin directly teleported back to his study, and then began to continue to study how to deal with the god of the hunt, Malor. After this period of time, Sorin roughly came up with 3 feasible plans. The first plan was to rope in other allies and invite them to deal with the god of the hunt together. At present, the only people he could choose were Princess Royal, the sea goddess, the goddess of wealth, and the goddess of agriculture. The possibility of Princess Royal taking action was not high. The sea goddess was probably feasible, but she did not seem to have fallen yet. Even if she took action, she would only be the incarnation of a god. If they succeeded in killing the god of the hunt, the sea goddess would certainly share the divine domain and divine power of the prey. The probability of inviting the goddess of wealth was even lower, and the goddess of agriculture probably did not like fighting. Soren thought about a lot of things during this time, but after thinking about it, he found that the price of allying with allies was too high. He certainly could not give up the core divine domain of the god of the hunt and give a part of it to others. Otherwise, why would he bother with it? Moreover, the success rate of this alliance was very low, and the possibility of exposing himself to the enemy was higher. So, after collecting information for such a long time and analyzing a lot of things, Soren still felt that the other two plans were more reliable. It was better to be prepared. Soren had always been a person who acted with a plan, so he was thinking about whether to carry out the other two plans at the same time. Chapter 6:10. North of the city of Moder was a cliff. There used to be a large group of Murlocs living here, but because of the strong rise of Moder, these Murlocs had long migrated to other places. Now a stockade was built with fences here. Few outsiders knew what this place was for, but if they wanted to pry they could still find out something. Because there was a need to transport a lot of meat here every day. Basically, it was caught fish. Occasionally, other meat would be sent to the stockade. Today, Phil Reed felt that his head was about to explode. He was a drow warrior, but he also had some of the abilities of a ranger. For a long time he had been busy with one thing, that was taming the captured wyverns. The first 3 wyverns that were sent here were almost tamed. Although they could not fly yet, he had already touched a little bit of progress. At first there were 4 wyverns, one of which was Miss Vivian's pet. Now it had grown bigger than an adult wyvern. Phil Reed had always wanted to know how Miss Vivian fed it, but arcane magic was full of secrets. Who knew what method she used? There was a roar of beasts in the strong cage. Phil Reed felt that he had to ask for more manpower from his superiors. Otherwise he would be too busy every day. Stop it. Phil Reed turned and glanced at the cage behind him. He raised his whip and whipped it directly. The velociraptor locked inside made a painful roar, and then gradually became obedient. At first it was a few wyverns, then a group of velociraptors was sent over. Today Motor City sent him a few huge crows. At first glance, he knew that these crows were not creatures from the material plane. The higher-ups actually wanted him to see if he could tame them. They were treating him as a professional beast tamer. Although Phil Reed had mastered the skill of taming petrified lizards, it was a creature raised by the drows. If he wanted to tame something else, he would have to figure out the habits of the creatures again. Call Kendet over. Phil Reed looked at the velociraptor beside him, then turned his head to look at the shadow raven in the other cage. He patted his head and said, "I want to see the samurai chief." That's not enough manpower. He has to send a few more people over. Soren caught a young shadow dragon. Along the way he also caught a few shadow ravens. Shadow ravens were huge flying birds that could not be seen in material planes. They could only be encountered in other planes. He didn't care much about whether he could tame it or not. Anyway, he would let the people below try it later. The indigenous people's technique of taming velociraptors gave him inspiration. Maybe the city of Mordor should take advantage of its geographical location. If he could tame this creature, it would be easy to find dinosaur species and subdragon species in the outer islands. City Lord's residence. Soren was thinking about the next step of his plan in his study when he suddenly heard the sound of hurried footsteps from outside. Then, a thin young man came to the door and gently knocked on it before delivering a letter to him. News from Vivian? Soren reached out and took the letter. After opening it and reading it quickly, he frowned slightly and murmured, "Fear Church? This little girl doesn't really want to incorporate the Fear Church, does she?" The content of the letter was very simple. During this period of time, Vivian had been fighting against the Fear Church. In order to protect the little girl's safety and further expand the intelligence network of Mordor City, Soren mobilized a large number of people to assist Vivian in her actions. However, after destroying some of the strongholds of the Fear Church, Vivian seemed to have begun to incorporate the leaderless Fear Church as the Son of Fear. Now, the outline of a new church was about to be formed. The people below did not dare to delay and immediately sent the news to Soren. The Fear Church was originally a mature church. Although this church had been hit continuously, first, a group of elites were wiped out by the demigod vampire, and then they suffered heavy losses under the attacks of Vivian and Soren. But after all, it was still an ancient church that had been passed down for a long time. After Vivian dealt with the priest of the church, she quickly gathered the remaining Fear Church members, and then the outline of a new church took shape. Does she also want to become a god? Soren gently rubbed his forehead, thinking about the possibility of things, and murmured, if she really intends to become a god, it's not enough to rely on these fear church members. At most, she will become a fake god like the demigod vampire. Vivian's actions were completely based on Soren's example. Soren operated overseas to develop his own forces, while Vivian targeted the fear church. It was obvious that she was preparing to incorporate the greatly reduced fear church and then develop it into her own team. For a long time, Soren's thoughts were very complicated. On the one hand, he hoped that Vivian would stay away from danger and grow up quietly. On the other hand, he also understood that as the son of fear, Vivian had to face her own destiny. That was, the Dreadlord had not completely fallen, and she still had to face everything that she should face. In her bones, Vivian was as strong as Soren. This was probably the reason why the little girl decided to leave Motor City. She didn't want to rely on Soren for everything. She wanted to face her own destiny. The demigod vampire. Soren's index finger gently tapped on the table and murmured, in terms of method, the demigod vampire's way of fighting against the Dreadlord is correct. First, he used the vampiric clergy to become a god, then he got involved in other clergy fields, and finally seized the fear clergy to replace it. This process not only weakened the power of the Dreadlord, but also increased his own strength little by little. The only thing that was wrong. That's right, Lionheart was too anxious. He became a god as a fake god, and the gap between them was widened. There was a big difference between a real god and a fake god. Looking at Soren's current church, everything was on the right track. Although the spread of faith was limited to the outer islands, it was not suppressed everywhere like the demigod vampire. From the perspective of an opponent, the demigod vampire was actually a very powerful and smart person. Unfortunately, his enemy was Soren. Time passed little by little. Soren thought for a long time before he made a decision in his heart. He directly connected with the high priest in the temple and ordered, immediately send a group of priests to the Wind Spear Hills. I need you to send people to help Vivian control the Church of Fear. Yes. Soren was ready to help Vivian implement the plan of becoming a god. Becoming a god was a very difficult process. He had paid so much to finally reach this step. If Vivian didn't want to fight against the Dreadlord as a fake god, then this process must be helped by Soren. Moreover, whether it was the power of divinity or the power of divinity, Vivian now needed to continue to accumulate. It was almost impossible to reach the standard of a real god with the power of the Dreadlord alone. Many things needed to be done step by step. The first step. It was to let Soren's priest help Vivian complete the whole church and completely turn the believers she gathered into believers who served the Dreadlord. This may require a little bit of mind control. As for how to do it, Soren felt that he should find a chance to have a good talk with Vivian. But now, if he could incorporate the Church of Fear, then one of the problems in the material plane would be solved. Cleaning up the believers of the Dreadlord in the material plane would seriously affect his power, and Vivian's danger would be greatly reduced. The Avatar crisis was coming. Although the boundary of the plane had weakened a lot, this boundary still existed. Most of the power of the Dreadlord was in the abyss. Those demon believers couldn't come to other planes at will. Cleaning up his influence in the material plane would weaken his power little by little. The demigod vampire did this in the beginning. If he didn't die in the hands of Soren, perhaps the Church of Fear would have been completely controlled by him. Chapter 6:11. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, Soren finally collected enough information and began to secretly implement a plan to deal with the god of the hunt, Malor. However, on this day the whole world changed a little. This change was so clear that any profession with spellcasting ability could feel it. All of a sudden, everyone was temporarily disconnected from the weave, and low-grade magi were completely unable to cast spells. Although this state of disconnection only lasted for a few seconds, the impact it had was rather huge. Almost all the wizards felt it. Gloria and the Fallen Witch could be said to have teleported in front of Soren in an instant. The two legendary witches' faces were slightly pale, and there seemed to be a faint trace of panic in their expressions. This kind of panic rarely appeared on legendary spellcasters. The same scene played out all over the world. As a part-time wizard, Soren naturally had the same feeling. But as a god he felt more. Because at that moment, in addition to the disconnection of the magic network, even the faith network above the 9th layer of the magic network, which was dedicated to serving the gods, was temporarily disconnected. Some kind of force interfered with the operation of the magic network, and then it gradually recovered. Did you feel it? Gloria's face was slightly pale and she murmured, just now the connection with the magic net was suddenly disconnected, and all the spell slots are ineffective. Soren nodded silently. His expression was unusually solemn and he slowly said, the goddess of magic also fell. Calculating the time. It had been a long time since he left Amber City with Vivian, and the energy storm finally began to affect the powerful gods. At that moment, everyone was disconnected from the magic net, and it should be the goddess of magic who fell as well. The energy storm greatly interfered with the magic net, and the goddess of magic was one of the most affected gods. As a god with greater divine power, she should be the first to fall. Unlike the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, who had taken the initiative to fall down, the goddess of magic had fallen down passively because she was actually very afraid of leaving her god's kingdom. The previous goddess of magic had fallen down because she had fallen down from her god's kingdom. Gods were almost immortal in their kingdom, but once they left it, they could die. Alas. Soren sighed softly and finally decided to talk about some things that could be said. He slowly said, all this time I've been feeling a terrible danger approaching. Especially now that I've entered the realm of the gods, the feeling of this terrible disaster is becoming more and more obvious. A terrible energy storm has appeared in the multiverse. This power erupted from the Sea of Chaos and directly swept through all the kingdoms. The gods were affected the most, so during this period of time, there were traces of other gods appearing one after another. In fact, they didn't show up on their own accord. Instead, they fell because of this terrifying energy storm. I've been worried that this situation will get worse. I didn't expect that even the goddess of magic wouldn't be spared today. If anything happens to the goddess of magic, the magic network might collapse, and there will be magic chaos in many places. You'd better be mentally prepared. Arcana techniques don't necessarily have to rely on the weave to cast them. Perhaps you should start thinking about how to cast spells without the weave. The two legendary witches froze in place. Gloria showed a thoughtful expression, while the fallen witch looked at Soren with a slight light in her eyes. She had always thought that Soren knew something, and it seemed that what happened today proved that everything was true. The Avatar crisis had finally arrived. From the moment the goddess of magic fell to the mortal world, the Avatar crisis was on the verge of breaking out. The fall of the goddess of magic was just the beginning, which meant that the energy storm that erupted from the Sea of Chaos had affected the ancient gods with great divine power. There was still some time from the fall of the goddess of magic to the fall of the goddess of magic, and the Avatar crisis had not yet broken out completely. Only when the goddess of magic fell and even the belief network of the gods began to collapse, the real terrible disaster was about to come. The two legendary witches were silent. Soren was in a trance for a moment. So much time had passed in the blink of an eye, and he still remembered what happened when he was in Amber City. At that time he had been wondering when the goddess of magic would fall. But when the goddess of magic really fell, his mood could not help but become extremely heavy, because he himself was not sure whether everything he had been operating could survive the Avatar crisis. This was an era of disaster for the gods. Although Soren had mastered great power, he still did not have enough confidence in it. Wizard City. This incomparably powerful city that stood tall on the southern plains was in chaos. Although there was still no force in the material dimension that could shake it, in that split second just now, a trace of panic emerged in the hearts of all the spellcasters. Almost in the very next moment, the many legendary archmages of the Wizards' Congress were teleported to the conference hall at the center of the tower. The archmages who were not young took their seats one by one with solemn expressions. Everyone present did not say a word, but the heavy atmosphere shrouded the place. Panic was spreading. Just at that moment, the Wizard Alliance, which had a huge golem legion, controlled incomparably rich resources and wealth, and had more than 10 legendary spellcasters, suddenly became as fragile as an eggshell. The same scene happened in the Northern Tower. The head of the Northern Witch Council, the powerful Eye of the North, was almost instantly teleported to the astrology platform, and then appeared in the conference hall with a slightly pale and dignified face to gather the other witches. The goddess of magic had fallen to the mortal world. As wizards in the legendary realm, they felt this feeling more deeply. The magic net was still running. Wizards could still use spell slots to cast spells, but on this day many spellcasters in the legendary realm could not help but dig out ancient books related to the arcane era from their own collections, silently searching for something. They foresaw something. No one knew where the goddess of magic was. Because she was also known as the Mysterious Lady, she mastered the field of arcana, secret methods, mysteries and so on. At least when the Avatar crisis began, no one, not even other gods with great divine power, could predict her position. The only thing that could be certain was that the powerful goddess who controlled the magic net had fallen to the mortal world. Chapter 6:12. Redridge Wilderness, East. A skinny figure was moving forward quickly. Everything in front of him was a barren, dark yellow color. Even the weeds were not very luxuriant. Only kobolds would move around here. Even goblins despised this place for being too barren. There was an iron mine and a copper mine on both sides of this barren land, so it was not completely ruined. There were some towns scattered near the edge of the Redridge Wilderness. This place was close to the Gobi Desert in the east. Because of the terrain, even the desert trade route would not pass through here. Ugly Monkey looked around and then quickened his pace. Other people liked to use transportation when they traveled long distances, but Ugly Monkey's habit was a bit strange. He liked to walk on his own two legs wherever he went. As a rogue, he thought that this could ensure his concealment. Although he looked thin and small, and his strength was not as good as other people of his age, he was far more agile and durable than others. He always thought that his ancestors had a trace of halfling blood, so he was not tall enough and his feet were thicker than others. Ugly Monkey came here for a mission. As a brilliant rogue from Motor City, Ugly Monkey had amazing professional talent. After participating in the expedition to Autumnfall to fight against the orcs, Ugly Monkey's combat effectiveness was greatly improved. As a new rogue, Ugly Monkey completed all the missions of the scouts, got a brilliant record of 27 heads, and was about to enter the ranks of the first-line rogues. According to his merits, Ugly Monkey could already enter the intelligence network of Motor City and change to a more leisurely position. But he thought that those jobs were too easy. He was still a young man who was eager for adventure, and he believed that he could enter the realm of legends one day. It was impossible to enter the realm of legends by doing those leisurely jobs. Therefore, Ugly Monkey still chose to stay in the front line and set off immediately after receiving a mission. The weather in autumn was very hot. However, Ugly Monkey's physique was quite good and he did not feel tired. The purpose of his trip was Death Valley, a legendary haunted place. Haunted things could only scare ordinary people. For professionals, undead creatures were nothing. After this trip, it was because the intelligence system of Mordor City had found some abnormalities. There was an amazing change in Death Valley, so the mission of spying on the specific situation was given to Shipwreck Bay. Ugly Monkey happened to see the mission and accepted it. According to Ugly Monkey's thoughts, the best mission would be to follow Miss Vivian because there was a battle there that he could participate in. They were already very close to Death Valley. This place had once been a battlefield. In an even more distant era there had been some terrifying mutations. As a result, there were no living creatures in Death Valley. Even weeds could not grow here, so naturally no beasts could be seen. Occasionally, undead will-o'-the-wisps would appear here. Other than bored adventurers, basically no one would come here. However, when Ugly Monkey arrived at Death Valley, there were already many people in the vicinity. Many people had left their footprints behind. As a brilliant rogue, Ugly Monkey could even determine the weight of the other party based on their footprints. He looked at some droll from afar. One of them was obviously very dangerous and had a wild aura. The mutation of Death Valley had already spread out. Now there should be a lot of people coming to see, so Ugly Monkey could not help but speed up his pace and secretly pass this team of droll to the front. Death Valley. When Ugly Monkey came here he could not help but be stunned. This was not the legendary Death Valley. It was simply a valley of life full of vitality and vitality. Because it was already full of flowers, even if it was now autumn, the vitality of the valley in front of him was still not affected at all. The air here was so fragrant that it gave people a feeling of suddenly coming from the city to the mountains. Just breathing the air made people feel life and vitality. But everything in front of him was so out of place with the desolation of the Redridge Plain. The strong visual conflict made Ugly Monkey feel that everything in front of him was so unreal. It was as if everything was an illusion. Miracle. A droll's exclamation came from afar. The high-grade droll looked at the Death Valley full of flowers and green grass in front of him with a shocked face. He could not help but kneel on the ground and said as if he was on a pilgrimage, "This is definitely a miracle of life. This is a gift from nature." A group of droll knelt down. They seemed to be praying and also seemed to be feeling the power of nature. There was indeed a power here, an indescribable vitality. It was also because of this power that Death Valley, which had been barren for more than a century, had now become a paradise with fresh flowers and green grass. This is unbelievable. Ugly Monkey walked around the valley in front of him and found that all the places in the valley were full of green plants. However, near the outside of the valley, it was still a barren land. He quietly snuck in. Ugly Monkey avoided the group of droll and went into the inner part of Death Valley. He saw a pit in the center. Even if someone deliberately covered it up, it could not escape his eyes. It was a big pit. He did not know what smashed it out or if it appeared because of some other reason. The vitality of life was the strongest here. Ugly Monkey realized that there was something fishy about this. He looked around and mumbled, "According to the classification of the intelligence system, this should be the highest level. No, no, no. This is a miracle. It's beyond the level of the intelligence system. We must report this to Sir Soren immediately." Mordor City had its own intelligence system. During this period of time, many rogue scouts had been scattered out. Soren originally had the priesthood of rogue, so he had a clear advantage in this regard. Now the intelligence network of Mordor City had been distributed all over the world. Anything out of the ordinary would be sent back in grades. The highest level events would directly skip all intelligence departments and reach Soren's hands. This was a miracle of life. Ugly Monkey did not know what power turned the Death Valley, which had not grown weeds for more than a century, into the Valley of Life, but he knew that the power to change all of this was beyond the scope of the world. If he really wanted to describe it, then only miracle and miracle could describe what he saw in front of him. Chapter 6:13. Death Valley. This place, which had been barren for more than a century, suddenly had such an amazing change. This matter almost directly skipped the layers of intelligence departments and was directly sent to Soren's hands by means of magic transmission. When Soren saw the content of the intelligence the next day, he also took it seriously. He immediately ordered the people near the south to mobilize there and send people to secretly investigate any news related to this abnormal event. Because he felt that all this was not as simple as a miracle, it might be related to some gods who had mastered the priesthood of life. The priesthood of life. In Soren's knowledge, to be able to cause such a big change, to directly change the environment of a place, to turn the Death Valley, which had not been green for more than a century, into the Valley of Life. This was no longer something that could be changed by the power of legends and mortals. This involved the power of changing reality and changing space in the realm of the gods, and any ability related to life. Even if Soren could change the environment of some areas with his current ability, it was impossible to affect such a big valley. This was either a miracle of nature or the power of the gods. Natural miracles could not happen for no reason. Soren thought that the biggest possibility was that a god who had mastered the realm of life fell from the sky. He was not sure which god it was because the realm of life was too scattered. For example, the priesthood of death was scattered in the hands of many gods, including Naruto, the mourner, the eternal sleeper, the god of death of the underworld, and so on. Even the god of Lich had mastered the realm of death because of the undead. Therefore, the priesthood of life was also scattered in the hands of many gods. Soren knew that there were the goddess of life of the elves, the goddess of life of the halfling, and the goddess of agriculture and Mother Earth who also mastered life and death. These two priesthoods had created too many gods, and they were all very powerful gods. The movement of any god was worthy of Soren's attention, because a large part of the disasters of the Avatar crisis were caused by the fighting of the gods. It could be said that if a mid-level god fell to the mortal world, he could easily destroy a country when he fully erupted. Soren had to pay attention to their movements and use this to determine the specific time and intensity of the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. If it was just a battle between one or two low-level gods, then the scope of the impact would be slightly smaller. But if it was a battle between two mid-level gods and above, then the scope of the impact would be quite terrible. Soren had yet to start an all-out war with anyone. As a weak god, if he were to start an all-out war with anyone, the destruction he would cause would be terrifying. The entire southern region and the coastal region would be plunged into terrible turmoil. Similarly, the same thing would happen to other gods as well. Everything in Mordor City was now on the right track. Soren only needed to plan for the future, and other things could be left to the city hall to deal with. Although the gods could not easily walk around in the mortal world, Soren had never been to the kingdom of God and had not enjoyed the state of near immortality, so he was not as panicked as other gods about falling to the mortal world. If there was no such panic, perhaps Malor, the god of the hunt, would not be in a hurry to restore his power, which led to his whereabouts being exposed to Soren. Everything Soren had been doing was risky. Many times he was dancing on the tip of a knife, and sometimes death just brushed past him. Most of the gods fell to the mortal world. The first thought in their minds was that they had changed from near immortality to possible death. Therefore, in the early days of the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, many gods tried to regain their divine power and then return to the kingdom of God. In the long river of history, there had been cases of gods falling to the mortal world. At that time, many gods tried to return to their kingdom. The former goddess of wealth wanted to return from the bottomless abyss, but she was captured and imprisoned by the demon lord for a long time, leaving behind the most humiliating memory in her long life. Many gods, including the goddess of magic, had accidents in the process of trying to return to their kingdom of God. Malor, the god of the hunt, was probably afraid that he had changed from near immortality to possible death. He was now frantically restoring his divine power, either to protect himself or to find a way to return to his kingdom of God. During the Avatar crisis, it was quite difficult for gods to return to their kingdom of God. Many gods had tried, but only one or two succeeded. Unfortunately, they finally went back, but because they went back too early, they were swept down by the energy storm as soon as they returned to their kingdom of God. The final ending of these gods was quite tragic. Others fell to the mortal world once, but they fell to the mortal world twice in a row, which directly caused their strength to be greatly reduced and they suddenly became the target of hunting. Gods were afraid of death. In fact, most of the gods were afraid of death because under normal circumstances, it would be difficult for them to kill a weak god who had a god's kingdom. Back then, a god fell in the Abyss Blood War, and there was no way for this god to be resurrected after death. So since then, almost no god could be seen in person in the Abyss Blood War, and even the incarnation of a god could hardly be seen. There was no doubt that the god of the hunt, Malor, was also afraid of death. They were like high and mighty kings. They were supposed to be chess players in the mortal world, but now they had become chess pieces in fate. Soren was also a chess piece. Although he now had the qualifications to be a chess player, he did not enjoy the treatment that a chess player would not cause his death no matter what the chessboard was. Therefore, Soren was the most suitable god for his own transformation. No god would be more adapted to the state of a mortal saint than Soren. In the half-elf temple, Soren's figure appeared in front of his own statue. He stood there for a moment and then disappeared. When he appeared again, Soren's appearance was very different. He looked like a rough northern man with a very strong aura. His face vaguely looked like he was in his 30s and his expression was quite fierce. There was a scar on the side of his face, and he was wearing a simple hunter's outfit. He looked like an experienced hunter. Change form. This was the first time Soren used this ability. In theory, he could change into anything he wanted. A hunter. This was the main source of believers for the god of the hunt, Malor. Hunters of any race could become his believers, as long as these hunters were evil enough to offer the god of the hunt the sacrifices he needed. Plotting against another god. It was almost impossible for Soren to rely on the ability of his subordinates, so this plan needed him to act personally. If necessary, he would not hesitate to expose his demon incarnation to besiege the target. Chapter 6:14. Port Tylon. Soren, who was dressed in animal skin, walked down from the deck. In order to prevent the prophecy from interfering with his plan, Soren forged a false space that could prophesy. He was a hunter from near the Lost Forest. In order to pursue wealth, he had gone to the outer islands to adventure and hunted a Quetzalcoatlus alone. As a warrior and a forest ranger, Soren had done all the above before he came to Port Tylon from Moder. There was no other way. Soren himself was not sure if there were any spellcasters who could prophesy among the followers of the god of the hunt, Malor. If someone used a prophecy spell on him, it would be easy to be suspicious if he could not see anything. If he saw too much, it would also be easy to be suspicious. It was better for him to do something that could be seen in the prophecy. In this way, even if the gods used a prophecy on Soren, as long as the difference in strength between the two sides was not too great, they could only see what Soren wanted them to see. His name was now Soros. In order to ensure that everything was flawless, Soren even learned the accent, dialect, near the Lost Forest. Port Tylon was busy. Soren's arrival did not alarm anyone. He now looked like a wandering adventurer. As the wealth of the outer sea route became more and more amazing, There were many adventurers like Soren in disguise. Because of his fierce aura, no one dared to provoke him, especially when they saw the strong bow on Soren's back. Many people could not help but think twice about their own bodies. Since he was disguised, he must disguise himself fully. Soren's main weapon now was A+2 rare strong bow, and his melee weapon was A+3 rare boning knife. From any point of view, he was now a very powerful high-grade adventurer. In order to interfere with the flow of prophecy spells, Soren even made a trip to the Sea Temple. This way, if someone wanted to prophesize his specific whereabouts, it would involve the Sea Temple and the Temple of Wealth. The divine power of the two goddesses was not to be trifled with. Even the legendary prophecies would be affected by these fragments of the timeline. After doing all this, Soren set off for the southern region. Before leaving, Soren saw the Naga Siren priest again. She still looked the same as before, but the divinity on her body had become stronger. It seemed that after she had calmed the internal strife of the Naga clan, she had also received the gift of the sea goddess. Time passed. The person that Soren had to look up to in the past had now become a person that he had to bow down to. A strong person shouldn't look at others. As he moved forward, these people would eventually be left behind. From Port Tylon to the Principality of Rossard, Soren arrived at another enemy's base camp. The Principality of Rossard was the territory of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. All the news told Soren that this vicious woman was plotting something, but she was holding back now, and Soren couldn't start a war blatantly. After all, the Mordor threat had now spread throughout the south. Many nobles were worried about the strong rise of Mordor. And many forces of the church were also hostile to Soren's forces, worried that he would expand too much and affect their interests. In this case, Mordor was easily regarded as a potential enemy. Dealing with the fear cult was because they killed civilians in Mordor and caused great damage. This was a well-known thing. But without this title, the Mordor city might become an enemy after being instigated by someone with bad intentions. The once bustling roads were becoming barren. In front of Soren was a field of weeds. With the approaching of the Avatar crisis, all kinds of events were happening. Traces of devils, demons, and monsters appeared frequently. Even the living space of other species in the material plane was squeezed. Trade on land had been very sluggish. Many places had more than doubled the size of the militia in order to deal with those disturbing wild creatures. Goblins, kobolds, gnolls, lizardmen, ogres, hill giants, werewolves, vampires, undead, dragon subspecies, and so on. It seemed that all of a sudden all kinds of creatures had run out. The original ecosystem of nature had been severely damaged. The expansion of a group of ogres may cause many goblins and kobolds to migrate to other places, and then threaten the nearby human villages. Basically, this was the situation on the mainland now. There was a lizardman disaster in the northern tower recently. The reason was that the flood had expanded the lizardmen's territory. In addition, for some reason, the lizardmen tribes had united together. Now it was so serious that the Northern Witch Council had to send people to clean it up. Soren passed through the Principality of Rossard. He vaguely saw traces of the fallen here. It seemed to be an admirer of Bayer. He was a legendary figure among the devils. He had advanced from the lowest level all the way to the Grand Duke. Now, the situation where the demon army of the bottomless abyss was beaten by the devil army was largely caused by him. He was a legend in the multiverse. A terrible, despicable, and insidious traitor. Even other devils were afraid of him, hostile to him, and hated him. But even so, he still lived well. At present, the Grand Duke of Devils, Bayer, was the main commander of the Abyss Blood War. Everything that Soren's demon incarnation encountered in the bottomless abyss, which was the defeat of the Abyss Blood War, was probably his doing. Because in the past few hundred years, the Grand Duke of Devils, Bayer, and the Mother of Evil Dragons, Tiamat, had formed a weak alliance. At that time, before leaving the battlefield of the Abyss Blood War, Soren's demon incarnation saw the appearance of the Pentashade dragons. This represented the alliance between the Grand Duke of Devils, Bayer, and the Mother of Evil Dragons, Tiamat. There were many stories about this devil. The only thing worth mentioning was that he had written his legend in the Abyss Blood War. With a perfect performance, he made the devils think that he was willing to defect to the Abyss. He also revealed a lot of information about the devils. After several perfect betrayals, the devils completely believed him. Then, an extremely tragic thing happened. The devil army that attacked the first floor of Bator was completely destroyed. It even developed to the point where they lost half of the first floor of the Abyss. The situation of the bottomless abyss being beaten by the Bator Inferno in the Abyss Blood War started from that time. Soren was not very surprised that the Grand Duke of Devils, Bayer, had extended his tentacles to the material plane, because now the bloody war in the lower planes had fallen into a strange balance. The commander of the Devil's Legion should also be at his most leisurely time. However, Soren still paid attention to the appearance of his worshipper in the Principality of Rossard. He was prepared to arrange for someone to investigate the situation in the future. All the way south. In the end, Sauron reached his first destination, Amber City, the place where he first started. Now this place was very withered. Chapter 6:15. Amber City. This city, which had prospered because of the Agate River, had completely declined overnight. The disaster that happened that night had a profound impact on Amber City. Even if the survivors wanted to rebuild the city, there was no way to restore it to its former glory. Soren walked along the broken streets. The once smooth paved road had almost turned into a muddy road. Because there was not enough wealth to repair it, many broken buildings could still be seen in the once prosperous city, as well as the broken walls left behind after the fire. At night, near the mass grave, the cries of ghosts could be heard from far away. Too many innocent people died in Amber City that night. Some of these souls still lingered in the mortal world, wandering near the mass grave where Soren found the treasure cave. Soren came to the cemetery. He found a small grave in the corner of the corner. It was the grave of the loyal old dog, Heath. Everything that happened in the past was still vivid in his mind. But now he was qualified to stand on the clouds and look down on all living things. The wharf of Amber City was deserted. Merchants no longer came here. Now that the continent was in turmoil, it was not suitable for trade. There was only a dilapidated warehouse left, which had been empty for a long time. Soren even saw the warehouse where he practiced his lockpicking skills, but now the door was wide open, and there was not even a ghost in sight. There were too many beggars. Soren saw many poor beggars. These people were afraid of Soren's aura and did not dare to approach him, but they looked at him with begging eyes. Sigh. Soren sighed slightly. He threw out a handful of copper dirhams and soon a group of beggars scrambled for them. What he saw in front of him. It really reminded him of the scene after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. In the future, such scenes would become more and more common, and it might even be more miserable than all of this. Amber City was no longer sustainable. The city was full of lethargy, and there was not even a trace of vitality in it. Soren passed through the ruins of the central city. This was the epicenter of the disaster. There was no way to clean up the ruins, so they could only build a new residential area somewhere else. Past here was the only intact temple area. With the power of the gods, the priests in the temple area blocked the attacks of the disciples of fear and the undead. Now it was the most popular area in Amber City. The result of the battle was a lose-lose situation. It was said that there were other legendary professions in that battle. The Fear Church also suffered heavy losses. At the very least, the Terror Knights and Blasphemy Priests were wiped out. A group of children appeared in Soren's sight. They were all half-grown children, wearing tattered clothes that had been washed until they were white and had patches on them. They gathered outside a temple and looked inside with longing eyes. Hunger. The price of food in the mainland had doubled, and there were starving people everywhere. Come here. A gentle female voice rang out, and then the children swarmed over like a swarm of bees. Soren suddenly stopped. His expression was startled, and then he walked forward. In his sight was a young and beautiful priestess. Unlike the other delicate and weak priestesses, she had a very strong aura. This priestess wore the emblem of the Lord of Dawn. She used to be a trainee priestess, but now she had begun to manage a church alone. She seemed to have become a regional bishop of the Church of Dawn. The priestess Angelia. The girl who had helped Soren and Vivian return to Amber City, took over the former temple, and seemed to have adopted some orphans. Lord Bishop. A young girl with freckles took Andrea's place and became a probationary priest. She quietly came to the priestess and whispered, "We can't go on like this. There's no one donating to the temple now. It's too expensive to do this every day. I'm afraid we'll go bankrupt soon." The priestess' smile froze and then she said calmly, "Are we almost out of money?" "Yes." The priestess nodded. After a dry laugh, Angelia glanced at the children in front of her and whispered, "It's fine. I'll take on a few more adventuring quests in a few days. We'll be able to earn some money soon." She had been supporting the children by working as an adventurer. Now that Amber City could no longer support the temple, she was very popular among adventurers as a priestess. "Someone wants to donate?" Suddenly the trainee priest's eyes lit up. She quickly walked over and saw a man who looked like a tough hunter. Why would a hunter donate to the Church of Dawn? Is he begging the Lord of Dawn to give him more prey? I don't care. It's been a long time since someone donated. I really hope he'll donate more money. The priestess tried to smile as kindly as she could. Then she saw the man in the hunter's outfit put something that looked like a stone into the donation box. She didn't hear the crisp sound of gold and silver colliding. Instead, she heard the sound of a stone falling to the ground. The apprentice girl's smile immediately stiffened. Could it be that this annoying guy in front of her really threw a broken stone inside? She waited patiently for the man to leave. After the man left, the priestess immediately opened the empty donation box. Sure enough, there was not a single kindler or silver dural in it. The man really did throw a stone into the box. The priestess was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. But when she took out the stone from the donation box, she was stunned. It was an unpolished diamond, the original form of a diamond. Her hands trembled slightly. The priestess did not know how much the diamond was worth, but judging by its size, even an idiot would know that it was very valuable. So she quickly took the diamond and ran to the bishop, panting. Sister Bishop, we finally met a tycoon today. Revisiting old haunts. Amber City gave Soren a little feeling, but it was just a feeling. He quickly put it down and continued on his way. His next destination was Whiterun. Soren was going to see what was going on in the city. At the same time, he wanted to find out more about the ancient red dragon. The ancient red dragon had a challenge rating of 24 and above, and it was basically as difficult to kill as a lesser god. So far, no god had personally dealt with it, and it was almost impossible for mortals to kill it. Soren felt that since he was already here, he would feel bad if he did not check it out. Chapter 616. Whiterun City. It took Soren less than a day to travel from Amber City to Whiterun City. The once bustling trade route had been completely abandoned. Autumnfall was devastated by the attack of the orcs, and the handicrafts from the Elven Kingdom and the Half-Elven Kingdom had completely lost their market. The road to Whiterun City was blocked by the ancient red dragon, and the impact of the double blow was quite terrible. Especially the chaos caused by the migration of all kinds of monsters. Many villages and towns that were not strong enough to defend themselves had to migrate. Although humans had a large number of people, they did not have an absolute advantage in the natural world. The current productivity could not support the explosion of population at all. Human villages could only be formed near suitable farmland because there were still many other species in the wilderness that were not suitable for cultivation. Food was the key to restricting the reproduction of a large number of creatures. With the transportation capacity of this era, most of the food could only be produced by oneself. The consumption rate of transportation was quite high, and there was a high possibility of being attacked by other species. Unless there was a huge force that had completed a huge project similar to the transportation of water. For now, it seemed, this possibility was almost impossible. So Soren saw many abandoned villages along the way. These villages migrated largely because of the frequent attacks by wild creatures. The decrease in population and the increase in danger made them unable to cultivate in peace. In the absence of enough strength to protect themselves, many small and medium-sized villages and towns began to migrate or merge. Golden Creek Town. This was a town that rose rapidly during the Age of Turmoil. Soren passed by this town on his way to Whiterun City. He and Vivian had also come to this town when they followed Gloria's caravan. And it was the first time he met a sword saint here. Today, the size of Golden Creek Town had tripled. There were reinforced thick wooden walls outside, and the population had at least multiplied several times compared to the past. It looked like a small city. All of these changes were due to the pressure from the outside world. The threat of wild creatures caused nearby villages and towns to migrate here, and a large number of humans began to build fortifications and formed an army to protect civilians. Golden Creek Town had a strong geographical advantage and manpower. Under such circumstances, it immediately became the most important human settlement in the vicinity. Soren stopped for a while. 2 watchtowers were erected in front of the thick and heavy gate of the stronghold, and there were guards on top of the walls. Soren even saw the silhouettes of rangers, who were in charge of scouting out the movements of wild creatures. The security here was tight, and the ratio of the militia was as high as 1/5. Soren saw a few barracks where the militia was being trained, which made him feel the aura of war. The smithy was bustling with activity, and many military weapons were placed on the shelves. This wasn't just to prevent attacks from wastelanders, but also to reclaim their lost territory. No creature was willing to give up their land so easily. Humans were forced to migrate. Once they regrouped, they would naturally take back their land. It was a sharp gaze. Soren suddenly felt that someone was watching him. When he turned around, he was surprised to see a familiar young man. A sword saint. It was a high-level sword saint with a straight blade on his back, dressed in plain cotton clothes and stained with blood. It was the same person Soren had seen before. His aura had become even sharper, and his entire person was like a sharp sword. The murderous aura around him was very strong, which probably had something to do with the current environment where monsters ran rampant. The sword saint met Soren's gaze and was startled for a moment. He seemed to have sensed Soren's strength, so he nodded slightly and left. A high-level hunter. This was the sword saint's judgment, and also the ability Soren had displayed. Most sword saints were quiet people. Sometimes they would rather use their swords to express themselves than talk too much nonsense. Soren noticed that the people were looking at him with respect. It seemed that this young sword saint had gained the respect and recognition of the people with his strength during this period of time. Sword saint was an advanced profession that attached great importance to actual combat. If this young sword saint entered the ranks of advanced professions at such a young age, a legendary sword saint might be born in Golden Creek Town in the future. It was very likely that this town would become even more prosperous because of him. Soren did not stay for too long. He quickly left the town and continued on his way to Whiterun. The road had been abandoned for a long time and there were weeds everywhere. After walking for about 20 kilometers, a notice board appeared in Soren's sight with a message written on it: "Be careful of danger. There are Ankhegs here." Skull symbol. Ankhegs. Soren smiled faintly and continued on his way. After walking for about 5 kilometers, he found traces of other people on the ground. They seemed to have come from another road. "Be careful. There's another one behind you," a middle-aged man exclaimed, and then a chaotic battle ensued. From the sounds of it, there were quite a few people. Soren even heard the familiar buzzing sound of the Ankhegs. It was a droll. Soren leaped into the air and leaped from tree to tree, leaving behind afterimages. He quickly found his target, but the most eye-catching one was a droll. It looked like a black bear, but it spoke in authentic Elven. A droll of the wild. They were the shapeshifters of the droll. They were proficient in all kinds of shapeshifting spells, and most of the time they relied on shapeshifting to fight. A priest. He wore a tattered priest robe, had a scar on his face, and was fighting with a priest's staff in his hand. Soren saw a special emblem on his body. It was a picture of pale hands tied with a red rope. This was a priest of the god of suffering, a god who held the titles of endurance, suffering, martyrdom, and perseverance. This was a kind and lawful god. He was also known as the weeping god. His followers included the disabled, the oppressed, the poor, monks, paladins, slaves, serfs, and so on. The reason why Soren was so familiar with this deity was that he had recently carefully recalled the information of this deity. The god of suffering, Ilmater. He protected those who suffered, and the god of the hunt, Malor, was one of the most important enemies of this god. There were a lot of Ankhegs. In front of Soren, other than the professionals who could fight, there were also a lot of civilians. These civilians relied on them to block the Ankhegs from devouring them. The strongest fighter in the crowd was a monk. He was not a monk from the east, but a local monk who had received training. There was an independent group of monks in the god of suffering, Ilmater's church. This group of monks was called the Broken. It was a group of monks who believed in the weeping god. The members of the group were not only responsible for protecting their followers and temples, but also for punishing those who cruelly harmed others. Evil deeds. These monks could be priests, and they could also advance into the ranks of secret believers, holy warriors, divine believers, divine power seekers, and even saints. They would not be punished by leaving their professions. This was the result of the fusion of the power of the gods and the training of the monks. The broken monks were very powerful advanced professions. The battle became more and more intense. However, the situation was not over yet. This was because the priests of the god of suffering were very good at healing, and this was related to their teachings. Although many people misunderstood the teachings of the weeping god, and some even mocked his teachings, the Church of Ilmater had many faithful followers all over the continent. In this cruel and realistic world, many victims, the sick and the poor, relied on the Church of Ilmater to survive. Many people in many areas respected the Church of the Weeping God, and his priests often received generous help when they practiced medicine everywhere for free. The middle-aged priest in front of him. He was one of the few members of the church in the current material plane who would completely provide free healing to others. The target of this healing was the poor, the civilians, the slaves, and so on. The priests of the God of Suffering were not very common. They were too active in their own parish. Because of some kind of conversion ceremony before death, all the priests of the Weeping God's healing ability was more than 5 times that of other priests. Chapter 6:17. Please subscribe. This is going to break the record. The monk in front of him should be an advanced Holy Saya. Of course, this was just a joke among adventurers. The full name of this class should be Holy Saya, a high-grade class that could use divine power and divine grace. The so-called divine power was actually the divine power possessed by the gods. If Soren wanted to create a new advanced class, it was not impossible with his current strength. For example, he could share a part of his divine power and cultivate a special advanced class similar to Nightwalker from the Rogue domain, or the most basic variant of Dark Guardian, and so on. These could be created as long as one had the Evil domain. The Shadow Lord had created such a special advanced class. However, the creation of such a special class required a high price. For example, the Holy Saya, in front of him, used the divine power of the Weeping God in battle. The conversion ratio of this divine power was quite low. Maybe the monk needed 1 point of divine power, but the effect was less than 1/10. This kind of advanced class could only be cultivated by gods with abundant divine power or a wide range of believers. For example, the God of Suffering had a large number of believers, but he rarely participated in battle. He had been a god for a long time and had basically mastered the power of divinity. He did not need to fight too much with others. After accumulating for a long time. In the past, the accumulated divine power was either used to strengthen the kingdom or used to bestow special abilities to his believers. The Avatar crisis was coming. This kind of special advanced class would be greatly affected. Otherwise, this monk would not have been besieged by a group of Ankegs. He could have killed one of them with a single blow when he was at his peak. This was because the additional damage of divine power was quite amazing. Special orders like the Broken were weakening. Soren was still not sure whether the God of Suffering had fallen from the sky, but he was sure that this god did not have any extra divine power to bestow upon the Holy Saya below. Priests had to bestow divine spells at their discretion, so there was no need to mention the additional abilities of other classes. There were a lot of Ankegs. Back then, Soren had encountered Ankegs in the vicinity. Perhaps it was because of the favorable environment, the Ankegs multiplied rapidly and formed an environment similar to that of a colony. There were more than a dozen Ankegs in front of them, and there might be more underground monsters that had yet to emerge. The challenge rating of the Ankegs was level 5 and above. Back in the day, they were known as the Rookie Killer, because if the player's endurance was not strong enough, the acid that they spat out could kill them instantly. Basically, if any of these civilians were hit, none of them would be able to pass the immunity test. That was why the professions were beaten up so badly by the Ankegs in order to save them. Sometimes, it was really hard to understand the thoughts of these kind-hearted professions. Soren even saw the priest blocking an attack from an Ankeg in order to save a civilian. Fortunately, the priest was also considered half a melee profession. Otherwise, even if he didn't die, he would have been seriously injured. Many of the injuries of these people were caused by defending civilians. If Soren was the one dealing with the enemy, he would definitely not do this. However, everyone in this world had their own opinions. Although he would not do this, it did not mean that he did not respect such people. It was just like how he treated the paladins. If things continued this way, not many people would survive. Not many of these people could survive. Those who were in the lawful good camp would always drag themselves into the mud. Therefore, there were very few people in the lawful good camp in this world. Leave them to die? Soren thought for a while and decided to make a move. However, he had to wait until the situation was more critical. He felt that he could use the power of the God of Suffering to deal with the God of the Hunt, Mailer. Even if it was just a small blow to the Church of the Hunt, it would reduce the difficulty of Soren's sniping. Swoosh. Just as the situation became critical and the priest was about to be killed by the Ankegs, Soren suddenly made his move. A sharp arrow flew out. Soren did not choose to reveal his true strength. He was currently disguised as a ranger and a hunter, so his main weapon was still the bow. It was a +2 rare grade bow with +2 penetration and +1 armor penetration. Against creatures like the Ankhegs, it was basically equivalent to killing one with 1 arrow. With 3 arrows, Soren instantly resolved the crisis. 3 Ankhegs were hit in the head. 2 were dead and 1 was heavily injured. Reinforcements. The sudden arrival of reinforcements lifted the spirits of these people. Drool quickly retreated and recovered a lot under the priest's divine spell. He then roared and charged forward again. The following battle was much simpler. With Soren's long-range support, the number of Ankhegs gradually decreased. Soon they could no longer withstand the pressure and retreated. Thud. Soren's figure jumped down from the tree. He was now disguised as a quiet high-grade hunter. He glanced at the others and began to collect the loot on the ground. The valuable items from the Ankhegs. This was also one of the predetermined identities. It was also the key to easily get close to the Church of the Hunt. After all, only a person who craved wealth would do such a thing to please the evil god of the hunt. He would even help the Church of the Hunt for wealth and power. Thank you. Thank you. May I know your name, sir? The survivors came over to express their gratitude. Perhaps they were afraid of Soren's strength, but they did not get too close to him. Soren looked at them coldly and slowly said, "I'm Soros." After that, he looked at the group of civilians behind him. Almost all of them were dressed like Highlanders. It seemed like they lived nearby and were carrying a lot of things with them. It seemed like they were planning to migrate. However, Soren could roughly guess what happened after they spoke. These Highlanders were probably planning to migrate to another place, so they asked for help. The believers of the god of suffering loved to help people in need. Now that the area around Whiterun was getting more and more dangerous, they probably wanted to escort these people to a safe place. If not for Soren, these people would have been in deep trouble. This reminded Soren of the Paladins. When the Avatar crisis broke out, the Paladins, as the representatives of the righteous faction, did a lot of similar things. However, sometimes without outside help, their excessive pursuit of justice would always make things worse. Sometimes there was no way to make necessary sacrifices, but the Paladins rarely did that. Sometimes they were willing to sacrifice themselves, but they did not think that after they sacrificed themselves, the fate of others would be even worse. These guys, whose beliefs were more important than their lives, often made mistakes out of kindness and made things irreparable. Perhaps it was because they were too firm in their beliefs that they would do many unimaginable things. They were noble, great, and glorious, but in Soren's opinion, they were not lacking in stupidity. Or else, things like that would not have happened in the City of Wealth. P.S. With hand-holding as the standard, the previous book needs to be overhauled. I've been so busy recently. Please auto-subscribe. Chapter 6:18. I'm so busy that I'm dizzy. The front gradually approached the battlefield. Soren did not choose to go with the followers of the God of Weeping. Although he did not dislike those who were in the lawful good camp, he did not like to have too much contact with them. This was purely a matter of worldview, but these people could still be used. The most obvious point was that the lawful good camp liked to meddle in other people's business. Many of them could not stand the evil in the world, so Soren revealed some information about the God of the Hunt, Mailer, to them. The God of Weeping and the God of the Hunt had been enemies for thousands of years, to the extent that they had to oppose what the enemy wanted to do. With their way of doing things, if they knew that the followers of the God of the Hunt, Mailer, were holding a bloody sacrificial ceremony, then the Church of the God of Suffering would definitely take action. Not only would they help the innocent, but more importantly, fighting the enemy was also their daily activity. The Church of the God of Suffering hated the two gods the most. One was the God of the Hunt, Mailer, and the other was the Maiden of Pain. These two chaotic and evil gods had a close relationship, and the God of Suffering hated them as much as Mother Earth hated the Lady of Poison. This hostile relationship between the gods even extended to the daughter of Mother Earth, who was now the goddess of agriculture. Soren did not have any real gods that he regarded as an enemy. If he became enemies with the Shadow Lord in the future, his followers' first target would be the Shadow Lord's church. Once this kind of war between gods began, it would be difficult to stop. The hundreds of years of war would lead to the accumulation of hatred and hatred. The War of the Ogres. Soren participated in a legendary battle, although he only participated in the identity of a small mercenary. But it was also the first time he saw the real power of a legendary battle in this world. The power of the Storm Lord gave him a great shock at that time, and also allowed him to gain his first legendary point. This was still the territory of the ogres, but this time the ogres were a little different. Their clan had changed to another clan, the Split Skull clan. More importantly, these ogres were the servants of the ancient red dragon. After hiding for so long, the ancient red dragon finally showed its claws and teeth. Because it became more and more impatient with the spying of humans and other intelligent creatures, the ancient red dragon began to enslave other races as servants to help it solve some small problems. Dragons had a habit of living. Before reaching adulthood, most dragons preferred to be alone with each other. But as time passed, their strength grew stronger and stronger, and the dragons became more confident. They believed that they could control other races, so they began to enslave some servants. Under normal circumstances, dragons would begin to control their servants after they reached their prime. When they reached their old age, they would begin to rely on their servants to manage their caves. These servants included all kinds of creatures, and sometimes even species from other planes. This depended on the strength of the dragon. The ancient red dragon naturally had enough confidence to control other species, so it controlled more and more servants. After the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the red dragon even forcibly enslaved other dragons as its mate, but now the creatures under its control should be limited to the nearby wilderness creatures. Through the dense forest, Soren quickly found traces of the ogres. This group of ogres wasn't very strong. They were mainly there to help the red dragon fend off adventurers who weren't strong enough, so they wouldn't let small ants disturb its peace. Any dragon that reached the age of the ancient red dragon would have much less energy and physical strength than before. They needed a long time to sleep. This was also the reason why someone could sneak into the dragon's treasure house. Soren passed through the territory of the ogres, and there were many traces of gnolls in front of him. There were also many other creatures here, such as lizard men, hill giants, and vampires. It was purely an accident that he found traces of vampires. Soren had always been very sensitive to the smell of blood. When he went to the ancient red dragon's lair, he saw a corpse that had been sucked dry of blood. The corpse of a gnoll. In the entire material plane, only vampires would do this, and the ancient red dragon was the most powerful and evil of the pentashade dragons. Most of the dark creatures were under its control. The city of Whiterun had tried to explore this place many times. But in the end, almost no one was able to see the ancient red dragon alive. Too few people were sent out and they died in front of the guards. Too many people were sent out, and the creatures enslaved by the ancient red dragon easily defeated the army of Whiterun. So far, no one had forced the ancient red dragon to fight in person. The legendary wizards of the ogres alone were enough to make them suffer. The ancient red dragon's monster level was above level 30. Its challenge rating was above level 24. Against a creature that had almost reached the peak of its power, all the legendary creatures in the wilderness of Whiterun had to bow down to it. Tarn. Soren's figure landed on the ground. He looked at the footprints in front of him with an interesting expression. Subterranean creatures. Taurens rarely lived on the surface. They were mostly active in the Underdark. They often appeared in labyrinths, but the dragon would occasionally use them as guards outside the treasure house. There was a passage here that connected to the Underdark. Almost after judging the number of footprints of the Tauren, Soren immediately determined this point. There were not so many Tauren in the surface world. Looking at the number of footprints, there were more than 10 of them. This was definitely from the Underdark. Of course, the ancient red dragon had servants to prepare everything, but the creatures it enslaved still needed to hunt. The Tauren's footprints looked like they came out to hunt, and there were also traces of large creatures being dragged. There were many passages that connected to the Underdark. Soren didn't know many of them, so he secretly paid attention to his surroundings. However, he couldn't find a clear entrance. After passing through the forest in front of him, a towering mountain range appeared in Soren's sight. This was the ancient red dragon's nest, but it wasn't located outside the mountain range. It was located somewhere in the innermost part of the mountain range. It was easy to find. Soren only needed to follow the footprints left behind by other creatures. This mountain range had become the ancient red dragon's private territory. A large number of flying dragon subspecies appeared in his sight. It was certain that they had migrated from other places. Most of them were wyverns. They were a subspecies that originally lived near the swamp, but now more than 10 of their nests had migrated here. No wonder Whiterun hadn't found anything. All 3 sides of the mountain range had been sealed off. Servants were patrolling the area below, and a large number of wyverns were watching the area above. Even the area near Dustwallow Swamp was guarded by lizard men enslaved by the ancient red dragon. Without the strength of a legendary, it was impossible to break into the dragon's nest. Chapter 619. Forget it. The previous books have been sealed, so be it. I'm annoyed by the changes, so I'll focus on writing this book. I'll start adding chapters the day after tomorrow. Soren gradually approached the interior of the mountain. Suddenly, he seemed to have felt something and quickly moved in a certain direction. The perception of the gods was very sensitive. They had an amazing ability to sense the elemental energy of the outside world, various magic waves, and even abnormalities in the environment. As soon as Soren entered the interior of the mountain, he immediately felt the abnormality of the energy of the veins. The fire element was too rich and surging. The density of this element was beyond the normal range of the environment. Even when he closed his eyes, he could feel the terrible power of the fire element in the depths of the earth. What happened? Soren's expression became serious and he murmured, "Did history deviate? I don't remember there being such an amazing abnormality here." In the past, Soren rarely paid attention to the ancient red dragon. Although he knew that there was an ancient red dragon here, no one would challenge it for no reason. Therefore he was not very clear about the situation inside the mountain. The closer he got, the more obvious the abnormality of the fire element became. Soren was almost certain that the ancient red dragon's lair was in front of him, but he did not know what exactly happened. Magma. Soren saw something that did not make sense. It was difficult to see magma in nature because of the environment. Magma would quickly cool down, but the magma in front of him flowed out from the mountain in front of him. The temperature nearby was a little high, and the magma actually gathered into a pool. This doesn't make sense. Soren pressed his palm on the ground and murmured, "This is an active volcano?" That was impossible. There are no volcanoes in this geographical environment. He did not know the reason. An active volcano was born in this mountain. Although it had not completely erupted, Soren finally knew the key to the abnormality of the fire element. This was something that had been artificially created. Therefore, nature rejected the energy here. The gods were also very aware of it. A huge force was brewing inside the mountain. Soren expanded his senses to the limit. He could feel that deep underground, close to the depths of the Underdark, there was a huge amount of fire energy waiting to erupt. If it were to erupt, the terrifying volcanic eruption would engulf an area of several hundred kilometers. Fortunately, there was no city nearby. Otherwise, half of the country would be destroyed. However, if the volcano were to erupt, the nearby creatures would be annihilated. The Dust Wallow Swamp and Misty Forest would be severely affected. Is it the doing of that ancient red dragon? Soren couldn't be sure of this, but he was sure that there weren't many creatures in the material plane that had the ability to do this. Other than the gods and saints, there were only a few creatures above level 30 that could do this. Ancient red dragons like to live near volcanoes. There shouldn't be any volcanoes here, but now there was a volcano that was about to erupt. Soren felt that there was a huge secret hidden here, and it might have something to do with the Underdark. Because he saw traces of the drows. That's right. Drows. Real drows. Unlike the drows in Mordor who were mixed with the blood of other races, Soren saw pure drows in front of him. So he was not surprised to see a female drow priest with a snake whip whipping another male drow. The other party stood where he was, not daring to move. He allowed the snake-headed whip to strike his back. In just 2 or 3 strikes, his entire back was badly mutilated, looking exceptionally horrifying. Trash. The female drow priest with a rather coquettish appearance but dark skin scolded angrily and roared, "So many people can't even catch a surface elf. What if the matriarch's plan is leaked? Damn it. What's the use of raising trash like you?" Soren approached quietly. He found that these drows were a bit abnormal. They seemed to have slight whitening characteristics, so they were not afraid of the sunlight of the surface world at all. A drow warrior with a cold face bowed his head slightly and said in a deep voice, "Priest. That's a very powerful droll. He's good at tracking and sneaking. We need more elite rangers to find him. But he's still injured, so he shouldn't be able to escape too far. I'll send people to continue looking for him." The female drow priest's chest rose and fell, and she said in a deep voice, "Go. What are you all doing here? Or do you want me to feed you to the lizards?" The other drow warriors immediately moved. They spread out in all directions as if they were looking for a druid in stealth. Did anyone else notice the abnormality here? Soren's figure stood in the shadows. He looked at the drows in front of him, then turned and approached a place. As a god who held the title of Wanderer, it was impossible for these drows to find Soren. Now he had two choices. One was to go into the crater to spy on the situation and see what happened. But there should be an ancient red dragon inside, so this was a little risky. The other was to go directly to the droll they were talking about. That droll might know what happened. As long as Soren found him one step ahead of them, he could figure out what happened. Tracking. Sneaking. This was Soren's strength. He found some traces almost quickly, and then quickly moved towards the south of the mountain. A little bit of blood. Although it could be covered up, it couldn't escape Soren's eyes. A natural low cave appeared in his sight. It was near a pile of rocks halfway up the mountain. There was a faint sound of breathing inside and there was a faint smell of blood. Who is it? Just as Soren approached quietly, a vigilant voice sounded. Surprised. Soren didn't expect that the other party could find him. It seemed that this guy's sneaking ability was really strong. It was a black bear. Soren also saw the corpse of another black bear. He couldn't help curling his lips and looking at the other side with a bit of appreciation. He slowly said, "You killed the black bear in this bear cave? Then you disguised yourself as it and hid? No wonder they couldn't find you. A very good plan." The pressure of a god was this shocking. After seeing that Soren wasn't a drow, the black bear in front of him suddenly turned into a tall and strong middle-aged elf. He already realized the difference between the two of them. Soren could easily erase his existence. The middle-aged droll's face was very pale and his aura was very weak. It seemed like his injuries were very serious. He slightly bowed and said, "I wonder who your excellency is? I am a droll member of the Dense Fog Forest Council, Burrow Cheetah. There is an elemental anomaly here. I was ordered to investigate the cause of this anomaly, but I never thought that I would meet a drow here. Their matriarch is colluding with a red dragon, as if they are planning a terrifying scheme. Your excellency. My injuries are very serious. Since you are a human on the surface, you definitely don't want to see the evil creatures of the Underdark succeed. I wonder if you can help me send this information to the Dense Fog Forest and the Silver Moon Council." Very honest. In the face of absolute power, the droll in front of him made a very wise decision. The drow matriarch? Soren couldn't help but frown when he heard this. He looked at the other side and said, "Which drow matriarch? Menzoberranzan City? Shadow City? Or Katnoros City?" The drow matriarch was actually colluding with an ancient red dragon. There was a lot of information in this matter. Even Soren couldn't figure it out because the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, might be behind this. "I don't know." The pale droll in front of him shook his head and said with a hoarse voice, "But there is a drow city under this mountain. There is a passage inside the volcano that directly connects to the Underdark." Entrance? The entrance to the Underdark was inside the volcano? No wonder Soren couldn't find it anywhere. There were clearly creatures of the Underdark here, but Soren couldn't find the passage to the Underdark. The creatures of the Underdark wouldn't appear for no reason. Now he finally understood everything. "All right." Soren didn't think for too long and quickly nodded, "Tell me everything you know. I will pass it on to the Dense Fog Forest and the Silver Moon Council." As a rogue who had lived in the Underdark for a while, Soren was very clear on how serious the conspiracy the drow matriarch was involved in was. There was definitely the shadow of the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, behind this. Because if the matriarch personally made a move, it was either to please the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, or to complete the oracle of the Queen of Spiders. The Avatar crisis was coming. The Queen of Spiders was the most terrifying and evil hunter. The things she was plotting would definitely cause terrible destruction. Moreover, her greatest ambition had always been to let the drows attack the surface. Soren wasn't sure what was hidden here, but since he knew some things he couldn't completely stand by and watch. Making trouble for the Queen of Spiders was good for world peace. Heal serious wounds? With Soren's ability he could cast a Restore spell because he had the ability of a level 20 priest. He could cast most of the divine spells, although it would consume divine power. However, if he did so, his identity as a divine being would be exposed. Therefore he could only pretend that he had activated a piece of high-grade equipment and cast a Heal Serious Wounds divine spell on the other party. Accompanied by the brilliance of the divine spell. Droll in front of him was obviously much better. He looked at Soren in surprise and slowly said, "This is what happened." Chapter 620. The wind howled. Soren used fly and rushed toward the misty forest. He learned the whole story from the droll. During this time, the chaos near Whiterun had spread far and wide, but because it only affected the humans near Whiterun, neither the elves nor other races paid much attention to it. It wasn't until the Droll Council in the Misty Forest detected the abnormality of the elemental energy in the mountains that it slightly attracted their attention. The Droll Council didn't want to offend a powerful red dragon, so they only sent a high-grade droll to spy on the situation. This spying was incredible. The droll found that this place had become an active volcano. This was obviously a man-made volcano, which caused the elemental energy nearby to be abnormal. Burrow Cheetah was a droll who was proficient in stealth. When he first discovered the creatures in the Underdark, he also felt that something was wrong. So, he went deep into the volcano to spy on the situation, but he didn't expect an even more amazing conspiracy to surface. The bottom of this volcano was directly connected to the Underdark, and he also found a city of drows nearby. The volcano on the surface world was on top of a volcano in the Underdark. Before he could figure out what was going on, he was then discovered by the elite guards of the drows. After a chase, he met Soren, who happened to come over. There was no doubt. There must be a huge conspiracy hidden in this. A drow's matriarch and an ancient red dragon colluded together. There was no need to guess that they would never get together for a chat. The misty forest gradually came into view. Soren's figure landed from the sky. There used to be a huge ancient tree here, so the forest was shrouded in some kind of power. In order to avoid exposing his identity, Soren chose to go on the ground. This was the Droll's territory and also the gathering place of the Ents. There was a shepherd guardian here, and its level was as high as 36. A level 20 Droll, level 10 shepherd guardian, level 6 nature's guardian. It should still be sleeping now. However, if it were to wake up, even the saints would have to think twice before doing anything to it. The real overseer of the misty forest was the Droll cult. The Ents had a slow perception of time. If no one woke them up, they would probably have to wait until some huge change happened in the misty forest before they woke up from their slumber. Nature God system. The oldest natural gods did not need much faith because they were the embodiment of nature. The Ents were the creations of the natural gods, but they rarely appeared in the outside world. In the past few hundred years, the Ents had almost never left their gathering place. Their slumber was even longer than that of the dragons. Who is it? Soren heard the crisp voice of a child coming from behind him. After entering the misty forest, he slowed down his footsteps so that it would be easier for him to find the members of the Droll Order. Soren turned around. He raised his eyebrows slightly and stared at the beautiful little thing that was only the size of his palm. He smiled and said, "Flower fairy?" Flower fairies. One of the embodiments of nature. In this world, most of the creatures with spirits were born in nature. They were like monsters in Eastern mythology. Most of the time, they were considered the embodiment of nature's beauty. The flower fairies were the weakest spirits creatures. Compared to the abilities of the water fairies and tree fairies, most of them with a challenge rating of less than 5 were very small. They were only good at some innate spell-like abilities and a small part of their charm ability. The little thing looked at Soren with vigilance and said, "You're trespassing into the territory of nature's spirits. You're not welcome here. Outsider. Get out of here quickly or we'll attack." Buzz buzz buzz. The sound of bees flying was heard. Soren obviously found that there were other flower fairies nearby. These little things were born with the ability to hide. If they did not take the initiative to show themselves, even a very smart rogue would have a hard time finding them. These little things were very exclusive and naughty. Sometimes they would play tricks on other people who entered the forest. Therefore, there were legends of fairies in some places. Basically, most of these things were done by the flower fairies, tree fairies, and water fairies. Naturally, Soren was not afraid. On the contrary, he was afraid of the little thing in front of him. She looked very fierce, but in fact she was very weak. These nature spirits were stronger than ordinary people. They did not have any advantage in front of high-grade professions, so they hid in the deepest part of the forest. "I don't mean any harm." Soren looked at the little thing in front of him. He did not have the intention to fight. He slowly said, "I'm looking for the Droll in the misty forest. I have an important message to tell them. If you don't mind, maybe you can take me to them." There was a saying in the tavern. That was a natural soul-type creature. They were born with +1 luck. Perhaps they were blessed by nature. If someone hurt them, their luck would be lowered by a little. There was no evidence for this saying, but many adventurers believed it. The flower fairies, tree fairies, and water fairies were very rare. Even if they encountered them, they would avoid conflict. The only thing that was certain was if you killed a certain number of nature spirits, you would gain a hidden ability, nature's hatred. They were protected by nature. Although the tree fairies were often imprisoned by some powerful legendary figures because of their beautiful appearance, the ones who would actually kill them were very few people with twisted minds. The flower fairies were a companion species. Under normal circumstances, it was very difficult for them to leave their birthplace. As a kind of spirit creature, these nature spirits were more related to the droll. But they trusted the treants the most. They were quite repulsed by any other race, whether it was humans, dwarves, or elves. Their own strength could solve a lot of problems. Although the flower fairies were very repulsed by Soren's identity as a human, because they were afraid of his strength, they still chose to help him find the droll. Most of the droll in the misty forest were of the nature element. There was once a case where a wild droll attacked a bear. So, most of the droll in this faction were very reclusive. It was very difficult to get along with them. Soren didn't plan on increasing their friendliness. His goal was to tell the droll about what had happened. The droll were all stubborn and powerful people. It was fine if they didn't know about this, but if they knew, they would definitely do something about it. The droll order had connections with each other. As long as this connection was connected, Soren wouldn't even need to do anything. The droll would go and cause trouble for the Queen of Spiders. For this kind of thing, Soren was happy to see it happen. Then there was the Silver Moon Council. It was an organization that served the Lady of Silver Moon. It was independent of the Silver Moon Church, and the Moonwalkers were their main members. It was a very powerful force. Soren suddenly remembered something. The death of the ancient red dragon seemed to have something to do with the Lady of Silver Moon. At that time, it was the incarnation of the Holy Spirit that killed the ancient red dragon. Who exactly did it? Soren couldn't be sure because there weren't many witnesses. But now that he thought about it, he realized that the trajectory of history didn't seem to have deviated too much. He just happened to be involved in one of the events. Chapter 621. The Misty Forest. This was a very vast primeval forest. Similar to it was the Lost Forest. Both of these places were places where special creatures lived. Soren's current location was full of ancient trees with intertwined roots. The trunks and branches in front of him formed the shape of a gate. It looked ordinary, but after walking in, it was another world. This place was called the Gate of the Forest. It was a gift left by the nature gods. It was also a world cultivated by the Ents. In other words, this place was an independent half-plane. It was a special half-plane built on the material plane and connected to the elemental plane with the misty forest as its foundation. This place was close to the center of the misty forest. The surrounding fog would affect the minds of others, and even make high-grade professions hallucinate. Usually, very few people could come here. This time, Soren also came here to see if he could get some special benefits. The Gate of the Forest was a special half-plane. Its existence was based on the roots of a huge ancient tree. The ancient tree of unknown age had died, but the roots still retained a huge amount of power. That was why the nature protector had turned this place into an independent demi-plane. Even the wild droll had to get the collective consent of the high-grade members of the council before he could enter. Because this was the place where many Ents slept, there was a great secret hidden inside the Gate of the Forest. This place was a large legendary level dungeon. The so-called dungeon was actually called by adventurers. There were many things in this world that couldn't be replicated. The concept of dungeon was just a joke. There were very few recorded dungeons. Basically, the level of the team challenge was above level 15. Moreover, most of the places that could be called dungeons were independent half-planes. For example, the city of Motor that Soren was now ruling, as well as the wizard tower in the shadow plane, the war chess half-plane, the secret laboratory, and so on. These places were almost all legendary level dungeons. The jungle gate hadn't mutated yet. After the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, many places had been irreparably damaged because of the huge energy fluctuations. The battle of the gods had caused the material plane to be riddled with holes. Therefore, the jungle gate would undergo some terrible upheaval in the future, so that the Ents here were affected by the violent power. The raging fire from the Bator Inferno affected the Ents' minds, making them hate those who destroyed nature. In the future, the entire Misty Forest would become a dangerous zone with a challenge rating of more than 12. Of course, it was still relatively peaceful here. The forest gate had not been destroyed, and the structure of the half-plane was still very stable. This was one of the reasons why Soren came here personally. He wanted to sneak into the gate of the jungle. There were some things he was interested in. It was a mysterious item that could increase one's attributes. As mentioned before, there were very few things that could increase attributes in the entire material plane. Such things were very precious even to the gods. Coincidentally, there was such a thing inside the gate of the jungle, and it was extremely valuable to Soren. However, this place was already in chaos at that time. If he sneaked in now, he was still a little worried that he would alarm the nature's guardian with a profession level 36, but it was worth a little risk. Saint Form. Rogue Divine Domain. The rogue's divine domain could give Soren an extra sneak bonus. He carefully sensed his surroundings, and then slowly stepped into the gate made of branches in front of him. Space was distorted. In the blink of an eye, Soren had appeared in another space. Lush trees were everywhere in front of him. It was different from the destroyed and burnt dead trees in his memory. Now the inside of the jungle gate was full of vitality. In the farthest distance of Soren's sight, there was an oak tree up to hundreds of meters high. This was an oak sage with a challenge rating of 21. It was also one of the guardians left behind by the nature gods. This was a special-shaped life species. Although they rarely appeared in the eyes of others, they still retained some extremely powerful creatures. Ents could also advance into professions. If Soren remembered correctly, the sleeping oak sage in front of him, its profession level was Level 10 Droll, Level 10 Ent Shepherd, Level 5 Oak Sage, Level 1 Nature's Guardian. Its total profession level was 26, and its challenge rating was 21. The Ents would receive gifts from nature as time passed. Many of them were born with the abilities of druids and tree shepherds. If they didn't have obvious weaknesses, they would be even more challenging to defeat. It was very quiet inside the gate of the jungle. There weren't many animals living here, only countless ancient trees. Ordinary people would feel like they were drunk on oxygen when they came here. Most of the trees in front of him were oak. Oak was one of the trees that could easily produce Ents. Relying on his god-level perception, Soren could easily find at least a dozen Ents with a monster level of 10 or above nearby. A clear river flowed down from the mountains in the distance. Soren carefully avoided the perception of the Ents, and then gradually went deeper into the gate of the jungle. This place had not been destroyed by the war, so the map in his memory was useless. In front of him was still a quiet and peaceful paradise. The Ents were quietly sleeping here. Haha. Stop it, Tarendi. If you continue to be naughty, I'll get angry. Crisp laughter came from the front. Soren vigilantly hid in the shadows and then slowly approached. There were 3 beautiful figures in front of him. They looked a bit like elves wearing beautiful red, yellow, and green dresses. At this moment they were playing by the river. Their graceful bodies were filled with an indescribable charm. That's one of the residents of the Gate of the Jungle. If the war had not spread here, then most of the Ents here had not died, so this should be the place where most of the Ents lived in the material plane. They were the companions of the ancient trees, beautiful children born of nature. The Ents could not leave their companions for too long, so the ancient trees that they relied on should be nearby. Soren quietly watched for a while, and did not disturb these beautiful Ents. Instead, he continued to go deeper into the Gate of the Jungle along the river. In the deepest part of this place, it was the place where the guardians of nature slept. There was a special pool left from ancient times, and the essence of life would be born in it. The outside world was used to calling it the water of life. This was Soren's goal. It was a special item that could permanently increase one's lifespan, and an additional 1 point of constitution. Soren's constitution was now 24 points. As his profession level increased, it became harder to obtain attribute points. If he could get the water of life in advance, then he could directly obtain the ability of epic constitution. Moreover, lifespan and eternal youth may be nothing to the gods, but for other creatures, it was priceless. As the incarnation of the gods, the only thing that could threaten Soren here was the powerful guardians of nature. Chapter 622. The Oak Sage had a wide range of perception. In fact, many of these nature guardians had dug their roots deep into the ground. The entire half-bit wall had a direct connection with them. It was like a kingdom managed by them. The nature guardians here had the same ability as the tower spirit of the war chest bit wall, number 13. If Soren just sneaked in, it would be better, but if there was a battle or destruction of the environment, then the ancient tree guardians here could easily find his traces. Tree spirits, flower spirits, water spirits. Soren saw many beautiful figures here. They lived quietly in this paradise, almost living a carefree life. But all this would not last for long. The devils of the Bator Inferno and the demons of the abyss have always liked these natural souls because they were the embodiment of the beauty of nature. They only needed to slightly distort the power of the soul, and the power of these natural souls could be more useful. The most basic point was that whether it was flower spirits, water spirits, tree spirits, etc., the high-grade devils of the Bator Inferno and the high-grade demons of the abyss could easily turn them into lustful demons and succubus. This kind of transformation was quite cheap. Because the two had a very high compatibility in soul, it only took a little bit of power to turn them into lustful demons and succubus. So after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the jungle gate was destroyed and became an independent world. There were still a certain number of lustful demons and succubus wandering here. These were the remaining souls that were distorted and transformed. One was the beauty of kindness, the other was the beauty of evil. Soren didn't want to change anything and he didn't have the ability to change the world. The outbreak of the Avatar crisis was destined to be unstoppable. He was lucky to be able to protect Mordor City after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. The closer he got to the inside of the jungle gate, the taller the trees became. Here were all ancient trees of war which were basically oak. After they were activated, their combat power was far greater than others. Rumbling footsteps could be heard. A giant maple tree appeared in Soren's line of sight. It seemed to be about 20 meters tall, and there were traces of a human on its body. It walked slowly through the dense forest, carefully paying attention to the saplings under its feet. From time to time, it would stop and whisper something in the ancient and slow language of the Treants. It held a special tool in its hand and occasionally sprinkled a drop of water. Then, a big tree would grow crazily and take root in the depths of the earth at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was the legendary water of vitality. It was a special item created by the wise one of the ancient trees. Its effect was not as exaggerated as the water of life, but it could be used to heal injuries and accelerate the growth of the ancient trees. The water of vitality was a rare item that was relatively easy to obtain. The wise maple tree walked for about a few hundred meters. Then, it seemed to have discovered something. It stopped in front of a tall oak tree. As if it felt some kind of power, it poured all the water of vitality on the oak tree. Then, many roots grew out of the oak tree and its whole body became bigger and bigger. A smile appeared on the wrinkled face of the maple tree sage. He said in a gentle and slow voice, "Slow down. Slow down. Don't rush. Take root in the earth. Deeper. Even deeper." A low incantation could be heard. The wise maple tree sage in front of him was casting a spell. There was a spell in the wizard school that could only be cast by high-grade wizards and above. At this moment, the spell cast by the wise maple tree was the tree sage. It was a legendary creature that took on the role of tree shepherd. This was its daily activity. As an ancient treant, they were almost aloof from worldly affairs. Their daily task was to cultivate the forest, and then choose the ancient trees with enough vitality. With the help of the tree sage spell, they slowly turned them into new treants. They had been doing this kind of work for thousands of years. So in this kingdom, there were more than 2 digits of legendary ancient trees and tens of thousands of treants with a challenge rating of 5 and above. Only the army of the bottomless abyss and the Bator Inferno had the ability to destroy such a kingdom. The tree sage succeeded. The oak tree in front of him had the outline of a human. It moved slowly and then fell into a deep sleep again. The treants were rarely active. Even if they were part of the ancient tree guardians, they would still grow like trees. As time passed, their strength would gradually increase. This process might be slow, but it had already been going on for a long time. The wise maple tree had completed its task for today. The birth of a treant was not easy. Even if it was a legendary creature, it could only cultivate one treant at a time. The wise maple tree came to a high slope. Then it stuck its roots into the ground and its whole shape changed. In the end, it turned into a huge ancient tree. It needed to rest. The water of vitality was the essence of nature that it cultivated. Only with enough water of vitality could it complete its task of cultivating an ancient tree. Soren's target was not the water of vitality. He carefully sneaked in from the side. The nearby forest was guarded by this maple tree sage, and the entire gate of the jungle was divided into its own territory. Every region was guarded by a legendary level tree shepherd. Soren followed the path according to his memory. On the way he saw a golden oak tree. It was a nature's guardian. The Trent's highest profession. Nature's guardians were basically high-grade legendary creatures. Their profession could reach level 25 or higher. Most of the nature's guardians were promoted from droll to treant shepherds, and then from treant shepherds to nature's guardians. They had the power to control trees. Any plant was their weapon. When needed, they could awaken the entire forest. As he got closer, Soren could feel a strong presence of life. This was a very ancient power. There were only a few places in the universe that could produce the water of vitality. The jungle gate in front of him was one of the two places in the material plane. The ancient tree guardians. Inside the jungle gate there were more and more ancient tree guardians. If it wasn't for Soren's proficiency in stealth, he would have had to fight countless battles. The treants did not allow other creatures to come close. I feel it. Soren couldn't help but slow down. He sensed the traces of life around him. The thing he wanted should be right in front of him. Such a strong presence of life could not be concealed. There was a huge root on the ground, but there was no matching tree in front of him. Judging from the size of the root, an ancient tree that could produce such a large root would be at least 10,000 meters tall. It was as tall as the Himalayas. This was something left behind from ancient times. The water of vitality that Soren needed was right in front of the root. There was a pool that could produce the purest essence of life. Chapter 6:23. The closer he got to the inside of the jungle gate, the more luxuriant the trees around him became. Soren even saw some oaks and maples with golden leaves. These ancient trees had existed for a long time. They were all hundreds of meters tall, and their branches and leaves were quite lush. Judging from the perception of the gods, these ancient gods had a strong breath of life. This meant that they were all animated treants, and there was no lack of ancient tree-wise ones whose strength was close to the legendary level. They were the real guards inside the gate of the jungle. Even a legendary-level adventurer team would not be able to break through their defense line. There was a special layer of security here. Under normal circumstances, even Soren would have a hard time breaking through, but he had a piece of equipment that was almost divine for rogues. That was the anti-detection cloak. There was a defensive enchantment set up by the guardians of nature here. Whether it was flying in the sky, running on the ground, or trying to sneak close, all would be discovered by them. The biggest function of the anti-detection cloak was to avoid any detection spells. This was also the reason why Soren dared to come here. Otherwise, even if he was a saint, it was unlikely that he could escape safely from the siege of a large group of legendary ents. Shadow Realm. Shadow Leap. As he got closer to the warning circle of the ancient trees, Soren chose the safest way to enter. His figure instantly escaped into the shadow plane, and then with the help of the power of space, he jumped over the range of the spell and directly appeared in the shadow of the rock more than 100 meters away. This was the power that legendary rogues relied on to come and go without a trace. A huge root appeared in front of him. Soren reached out and pressed on it. He could feel the life essence slowly flowing away. The speed of the loss was not very fast, but the life essence it had was too large. Even after thousands of years, the life essence that flowed away not only gave birth to the jungle gate, but also continued to nourish the entire space. It was like the oldest demon corpse of Orbis in the bottomless abyss. Some huge corpses still existed in some places in the bottomless abyss. Just the exposed part was like a mountain. They were on the same level as the huge ancient god corpses floating in the astral plane. A golden oak tree appeared in front of him. Soren could sense that this was a powerful nature's protector. He only had 1 or 2 seconds to steal the water of life. If he took any longer, the nature's protector would seal off the space around him. By then, even Soren would not be able to escape. Get it and run. There was only one way for Soren to leave this demi-plane unscathed, and that was to use the power of the Shadow Realm to travel to the Shadow Realm, and then return to the material plane from there. This way, Soren wouldn't have to worry about being discovered even if the other party was a high-tier legendary guardian of nature. There was only one chance. Soren couldn't help but take a deep breath. His gaze locked onto a special pool in front of the roots of the ancient tree. It was a bit like the reincarnation pool of the Bator Inferno, but it was filled with pure positive energy. Shadow Leap. Soren's figure rushed forward and crossed the space in an instant. He appeared next to the pool in an instant, and then took away a lot of water of life in the blink of an eye. The whole pool was suddenly reduced by about a third. Thief. An angry roar sounded. The golden oak tree sage woke up in an instant. Its huge body stood up, and with a powerful force raging, the surrounding space suddenly showed signs of being sealed off. Dimensional lock. A near-legendary spell, almost without any casting action, the other party directly completed it. However, at this time, Soren had already noticed that something was wrong. He didn't greedily take a drop of water of life. Instead, he instantly activated the power of the Shadow Realm and directly crossed the space barrier into the Shadow Realm. The moment before he left, he felt a lot of powerful breaths burst out from all over the jungle gate. Towering trees stood up, and at least a dozen legendary ancient tree guardians locked onto this place. Damn thief! The angry roar echoed over the jungle gate, but at this time, there was no trace of Soren. He only appeared for less than a second from beginning to end. Even these powerful legendary ancient trees didn't find any trace of him, and they didn't even see his appearance clearly. Killing one person in 10 steps, leaving no trace for 1,000 miles. This was Soren's favorite sentence, but if a rogue wanted to do this they had to reach the legendary realm. Everything in front of him was gray. Soren's figure appeared somewhere in the Shadow Realm. He wasn't very clear about where he was because the situation at the time was too dangerous. He was completely teleported here randomly. But it didn't matter. He could still return to the material plane through the Shadow Realm, and then it would be easy to determine the direction. Of course, he couldn't directly return to the material plane now because the Shadow Realm was connected to the material plane. If he returned to the material plane from here, he would probably appear directly in the misty forest. Now that he had stolen the water of life of the ancient Ents, it would be terrible if he returned to the misty forest. Soren was going to set off from here, go along a direction for dozens of kilometers, and then teleport back to the material plane. In this way he would basically be out of the range of the misty forest. As long as he wasn't in the misty forest, those ancient trees couldn't do anything to him. Wisps of fog surrounded the area. It was impossible to determine the specific relationship between the material plane and the Shadow Realm, but what Soren saw now was also a dense forest. The trees growing in this forest were like reflections. They had twisted roots and there was not even a trace of green. All that could be seen was a gray color. The trees in the Shadow Realm were also gray. There were many creatures in the Shadow Realm that mortals didn't know. Soren saw a twisted shadow, and it quickly targeted Soren. Arcane Missile. An arcane missile directly took away the twisted shadow in front of him. They were souls that were accidentally reincarnated in the Shadow Realm, like twisted petitioners in the bottomless abyss. The twisted shadow began to retreat. Soren looked around and then flew towards the south. He had to leave the forest first. The Shadow Realm was as big as the material plane. Although it seemed very desolate here, he could still see some creatures. Occasionally, there would be some huge broken walls in sight, which were left behind from ancient times. The fallen gods, the ruins of the Arcane Empire, and the wizards of the Shadow Realm. There were many gods who left temples in the Shadow Realm. The Arcane Empire also developed this realm, so there were many broken buildings here. He walked for hundreds of kilometers. There were few towns in the Shadow Realm. The natives were too scattered, and the population of the entire Shadow Realm was less than 1,000th of the material plane. This was the territory of the Shadow Lord. As a mid-level god, he had a wider influence in the Shadow Realm. At the same time, his kingdom was also somewhere in the Shadow Realm. This was a natural convenience. Although he was also forced to leave his divine kingdom because of the Avatar crisis, he was closer to his divine kingdom than other gods. Shadow Realm. With the distortion of space, Soren returned to the material plane again. In front of him was still a vast forest. He used a flying spell to observe the surroundings and was surprised to find that he was already very close to his destination. This was the territory of the elves. It was near where he was chased by the followers of the god of hunting. It was about 100 kilometers from here to Autumnfall. A long and towering mountain blocked the route, making it difficult for the orcs to reach here. At the same time, it was like a natural barrier that separated the elves from other races. Traditionally, going to the Elven Kingdom could only be done through the forest on the other side, which was hundreds of kilometers more. It's safe. After confirming that there was no danger, Soren took a little rest and began to check the properties of the water of life. Chapter 6:24. On the surface, the elixir of life looked very ordinary. It was just some relatively clear water. If one looked closely, they would faintly see a hint of emerald green. In fact, this was just an illusion created by the rich life energy. The water of life had a very rich power. It was the best healing treasure in the material plane. However, to completely change a person's physique, it needed a lot of it. The water of life had always been used by the Ents to cultivate the ancient Ents. This rich life energy could help speed up the Ents' advancement into Ents and nature's guardians. A row of data appeared in front of him. Item type: Water of Life, Fountain of Youth. Item grade: Special Wonder. Item description: The water of life has appeared in many special places in the material plane. It is the essence of nature, a treasure produced by heaven and earth. In the Eastern world, it is also called the Fountain of Youth. The ascetics believe that it has the ability to completely purify a person's physique and help them to reach the extraordinary realm. Therefore, the water of life is a priceless treasure in the Eastern world. There are very few places in the material plane where the water of life can be found. Effect: Restore HP, regrow broken limbs, heal fatal injuries, strengthen physique, eternal youth, extend life. Special effect 1: Restore HP. 1 milliliter of water of life can restore 10 HP. This effect is effective on most living creatures. Special effect 2: Regrow broken limbs. The water of life can regrow broken limbs, but it must be used in a sufficient amount. Special effect 3: Heal fatal injuries. The water of life can heal fatal injuries, but it must be used in a sufficient amount. Special effect 4: Strengthen physique. Drinking more than 1 liter of water of life can permanently increase physique by 1 point. Note: this effect must be triggered when the user is full of HP. This effect can only be triggered once. Special effect 5: Eternal youth. The water of life can delay the aging of any living creature. Any creature that has drunk the water of life will greatly slow down the aging speed. Special effect 6: Extend life. The water of life can delay the life of any living creature. Any creature that has drunk the water of life will greatly increase its life. Note: this effect must be triggered when the user is full of HP. The water of life. As an extremely rare special item, it had 2 special effects that could be triggered, namely physique strengthening and life extension. However, there were prerequisites for these 2 special effects to be triggered. That was, the user had to be in a fully recovered state. If the user wasn't at full health, the power of the water of life would only be used to heal injuries and would not trigger the effects of enhance physique and extend lifespan. Among them, physique enhancement had the highest requirement. It was extremely difficult to increase any attribute point. In terms of effect, the leaf that Soren had obtained before was rarer. Soren's HP was full, so he only needed to drink 1 liter of water of life. The amount that he had obtained was about 10 liters. If he used all of it to improve his physique, it would be enough to permanently increase the physique of 10 people by 1 point. Moreover, the effects of eternal youth and life extension would be triggered at the same time. The taste was light and a little sweet. Soren drank just the right amount, and a row of data popped up in front of his eyes. At the same time, a rich life force flowed into his limbs and bones. Use the special item, Water of Life. Triggered effect: physique strengthening. Permanent increase in physique by 1 point. Triggered effect: eternal youth. Appearance will not continue to age. Triggered effect: life extension. Lifespan will be greatly increased. Physique has reached 25 points. You have automatically mastered the legendary ability, Epic Physique. You have the basic ability, Strengthen. You have acquired part of the legendary ability, Epic Strengthen. You have acquired the legendary ability, Epic Physique. You have acquired part of the legendary ability, Damage Reduction. Ability Upgrade. Regeneration, Intermediate, upgraded to Advanced. Finally, there was the third attribute that had increased to 25 points. For a long time, Soren's attributes were far superior to others. However, this advantage did not have much of an advantage when facing the saints who were the incarnations of gods. This was because many of the incarnations of gods had an average attribute of more than 20 points. Some of the gods with great divine power even had an average attribute of more than 25 points. The life force of a saint was very tenacious. Soren's current life force was 385 points. For mortals and other legends, this was quite a terrifying amount of life force. However, for a saint who was the incarnation of a god, it was only at an ordinary level. Some of the warrior-type gods had a terrifying life force of more than 1,000 points. Under normal circumstances, Soren's life force had to exceed the level of an adult dragon to gain a certain advantage when fighting against other gods. Epic Physique, Legendary Ability. Your physique has far exceeded the range of a human. When you receive any damage, you will receive an additional point of damage reduction. Your test of endurance will permanently increase by 3 points. At the same time, you will receive an additional 10 points of HP. When you receive any test related to physique, you will receive an additional point of epic value. The information of the 2 legendary abilities. After Soren increased his physique to 25 points, his accumulated endurance had surpassed most of the adult dragons. The strengthening of the regeneration ability did not have much of an effect on him now. Because of his saint form, he could use divine power to cast healing spells and heal his own injuries. However, the basic passive ability upgrade was still useful. Epic Strength. This was a very important survival ability. Every upgrade would increase his life force by an additional 30 points. Soren did not have much of an understanding of it yet. However, in the future he might be able to use the ability points to directly obtain it. Unfortunately, it was very difficult to use a physique purification ritual on gods. Otherwise, Soren could use a physique purification ritual to increase his life force according to his current attribute points. Then, the increase in his survivability would be very huge. Along the way, Soren's original attributes gained less life force when he leveled up his profession. The ritual would allow him to recalculate his life force according to his current physique and maximize the potential of his body. If he could find the materials to perform the bloodline purification ritual. Then Soren's level 7 rogue, level 10 shadow dancer, level 10 wizard, and level 1 arcanist would be recalculated according to his 25 points of physique and the basic life force added by his profession. The bloodline ability of his body would be purified to the highest possible level. This ritual was very difficult. So far, Soren had only accidentally performed it once with the help of the dragon's blood. His goal was achieved. Soren gained 3 additional abilities. They were the legendary ability Epic Physique, the special abilities Eternal Youth, and Life Extension. These 2 abilities appeared in the passive abilities. Unfortunately, these abilities were useless to Soren, who was already a god. He was almost immortal, so these 2 abilities were more useful to mortals. He carefully put away the Water of Life. After gaining an additional point of physique, the Water of Life was less useful to him. However, it was still a priceless treasure to others. First of all, Vivian would definitely need it, but now he didn't know if he could give it to her. Soren was worried that she wouldn't grow up after drinking it. Then there was Gloria. The divination and prophecy abilities of the northern witches were the most harmful to their own lifespan. In theory, she was the one who needed it the most. As one of his closest women, Soren must leave enough for her. Then there was the portion reserved for the fallen witch and Princess Anna, and the portion that might be needed to make friends with the Princess Royal and the Eye of the North. In this way, Soren found that it was not enough. Because it was not easy to get this thing again, and there was not much stock in the entire material plane. If he wanted to go back and get some more, he would have to wait until the Avatar Crisis. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.